Can everybody hear now? A little bit better?
Absolutely.
All right, well, welcome everyone to our 15th Safety Advisory Commission meeting. My name is Dr. Chanel Jones. I will be standing here as the chair in lieu of our chair's absence. Ms. Jackson had some other engagement that she had to make. So don't want to delay us too much longer, so I just want to go ahead and get started. But before I do, I just want everybody to look over in this direction to Assistant Chief, who is now Interim Chief, Quinlan. Congratulations, we heard on your recent appointment. Make us proud. And the other thing that I want to do is, does everybody have a copy of the minutes from last meeting? Has everybody had a chance to go over them? Are we good with them? Any questions, concerns, revisions that we should?
My correction is that I was present and I'm not listed as present.
Okay. All right. We got that noted. Any other corrections? All right, so does we have anybody that wants to move that we accept the minutes with the one correction that Emily was present?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. It has been properly moved by, was that Tracy? Oh, Aaron, thank you, and second by LaShawn, and we accept the minutes from last meeting. All right, let's jump right on into the agenda. We have Lisa Callender, did I say your name correct? All right, from the Employment Assistance Program, you can go ahead. The floor is yours.
All right, this is good? Yeah. Thank you very much. We are here today to talk to you about all the things that we are doing in Columbus around officer wellness. We are really proud of the efforts that we are providing in terms of officer wellness. We get calls frequently and regularly from other cities about what we're doing. So we want to share that with you, along with myself and Commander Grizel and Lieutenant Haley and Iris Velasco will be here as well to talk to you about some of the physical things that we're doing within the division. So overall, what we want to refresh for some of you, and maybe new information for others, is that when we talk about wellness, we're really talking about a comprehensive wellness program, which includes psychological wellness, spiritual wellness, and physical wellness. And to that, we have the City Employee Assistance Program, and I'll talk to you about the Employee Assistance Program and the things that we're doing for officers within that. We're going to talk with you about the Peer Assistance Program that we've had in place for several years. Lieutenant Haley will talk with you about the Chaplaincy Program, and then Iris will talk with you about the Physical Wellness Program. So moving into the EAP, an Employee Assistance Program is a program designed to assist employees to help them be at their best. And perhaps some of you work in organizations that has an Employee Assistance Program. EAPs are a standard of care in law enforcement agencies, and we included this CALEA standard, which cites that having an employee assistance program available to employees to assist in any concerns, whether they're personal concerns or job-related concerns, is really important. It's a standard that we have within the City of Columbus. When we talk about having any kind of assistance programs, really what we're talking about are human beings who serve as officers having the kinds of things that all of us experience. So is there anybody in here who has never experienced stress? If there is anybody, let me sign you up, because stress is something that happens to all of us, including officers. And we know that when we can normalize that stress happens, then we can help reduce the stigma, so that if I'm an officer and when I'm an officer and when I'm feeling overloaded with the stressors in my life, that perhaps getting some information on how to manage that stress, I'll do that at an earlier point, as opposed to being stigmatized, not wanting to reach out for assistance or information, and that stress then grows and heightens. So we're really about educating our officers that stress happens. It happens in different ways to different people, and that getting help does not mean you cannot be effective in your job, but the earlier you can get on top of that stress and handle that, then the better equipped you're going to be to manage that and turn that around. We also know that not only by reducing the stigma and providing education about normal symptoms of stress, both cumulative stress and critical incident stress, but we want to have some systems and programs in place to help our officers that are easily accessible. So for example, many companies have employee assistance programs available to their employees. They tend to be contract programs where you call a 1-800 number or you call a number. And sometimes you might be getting in to see somebody within a day or a couple of days. More likely, by the time you get to a practitioner, it's going to be a week out. What we know is that for humans of in any profession, to reach out for help is a big deal. It's especially a big deal for officers to reach out for help. When they do, we wanted to make sure that we've got an easily accessible and available program for you, and that's what we provide in terms of our employee assistance program. We have a standard that we get officers in to talk with one of our counselors within 24 hours or 48 hours at the most. So it's about having programs in place that are accessible. And again, we know that reducing stress, intervening in stress at a lower level means less services or less impact on the job down the road. So let me talk to you about what we're doing within the City of Columbus EAP. We are a program that's housed in the Columbus Public Health Department. That's where the EAP program was housed and started 35 plus years ago. We report directly to Dr. Roberts. We're a medical program with confidentiality protection that's housed in the Columbus Public Health Department. And our mission is to help city employees achieve healthy behaviors, healthy lifestyles, and optimum job performance. And while we serve all city employees, we do some very focused work within our safety forces because we know that by cultivating those relationships, then we're going to have a higher utilization when officers are in need. And that's a good thing. We want that to happen. We provide a scope of service that is brief, short-term counseling. That's really evolved over the years. We now will see anybody that comes to EAP for a couple of sessions, but maybe up to 8 or 10 sessions. It really depends on, can we help that officer or that city employee with that situation in-house? And if we can, we'll do that. All of our staff are licensed independent counselors and social workers. A couple of us also have independent licenses as chemical dependency counselors. So there's a lot we can handle in-house. There are times when there are things that are bigger than that or require a specialty beyond that. And in that case, we're going to look for providers that we believe do a good job working with officers, work with those providers to get our officers in quickly, and we'll work with those officers or those providers and get folks to them. So we're providing assessment services, we're doing short-term counseling. We really try to cultivate a referral network of referrals who have an understanding of first responders. There are lots of clinicians in Central Ohio. You can open the phone book, you can find lots of clinicians. There are some that we believe do a good job with first responders, and those are the ones that we are going to want to get our officers to. So we provide referral, we do training. Commander Grizzell will talk to you some about the training that we do with recruits. We do a lot of training within the division, again, to destigmatize the impact of stress and that stress happens. And then we partner with our peers in the peer assistance program and with our chaplains. So while we abide by confidentiality laws within a EAP, if we have an officer in who is experiencing some kind of stress related to their job, we are not officers. We might say to them, it might be helpful for you to talk to another officer. Would you be willing to do that? And if they're willing to do that, we may pull out the roster for our peers in our peer assistance program and offer them the opportunity to talk with one of the peers. And I don't want to steal your thunder and jump too far ahead. And the same with the chaplains. When we have someone where faith is important to them, we'll follow their lead. When it's important to them, we will suggest that they seek the assistance of one of the chaplains. I've talked with you about that, about partnering with our peer program, partnering with our chaplaincy program, and researching and seeking out providers who are skilled in and familiar with law enforcement. Right now in Ohio, and I would expect around the country, it's kind of a hot topic for clinicians to understand first responders and work with first responders. So I've been part of a team that's gone around the state to educate providers on what first responders deal with, both police and fire, to really build capacity among the provider community. So that in a nutshell is really what we're doing at EAP. And I'd like to invite you to ask me questions to fill in any blanks that I've not provided for you in this presentation. Yes, sir.
Can you just give some data on utilization
So the average EAP utilization nationwide in any EAP, so not specifically a first responder EAP, is 3 to 5% roughly. We are on the high end of that for sure within CPD. We have a much higher utilization than we used to because of all the efforts that have gone on in terms of officer wellness over the years. It's not as big a deal to reach out and talk to a counselor as it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So we're really happy with our utilization. Could we always do more, do better? Yeah, we can. But we know now that when we have officers who are in need, that they're coming through our doors more readily than they used to. Yes, sir.
Are there any connections between the EAP and this whole notion of psychological safety and the culture of safety within the division?
Ask me that question again.
Are there any connections between EAP and the research around psychological safety? So I need help, I have the ability to speak freely about my need of help, and it doesn't stigmatize me, and there's a culture that supports that.
I believe we've been part of those efforts, yes, and confidentiality is a high priority. So in any kind of service like this, you want to assure confidentiality. So I believe that we are working within those efforts, yes. Yes.
You had mentioned the utilization rate, which is the question that he had, and you
Right.
said yours or CPD's is higher than the average across the nation. The average across the nation is around 5% or something
Correct,
like
yeah,
that.
and EAPs in general, that's kind of what you tend
Where
to
we are.
hear cited, right?
So do you know what percentage for CPD the usage is? If it's higher than the 5, do you have that information?
So it's on the, so if we have about 1,900 sworn officers, Chief, is that correct? So we see roughly 80 to 100 officers in any given year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And the 5%, is it all EAPs or law enforcement?
No, because I really can't find much about law enforcement specific EAPs because there really aren't any. EAPs in general, that's the utilization that is usually cited, is a 3 to 5% utilization. So the fact that we are on the high end of that, we're above 5% in that, is a good thing, I would suggest.
Are there typical situations that lead someone to seek assistance, and what are some of those?
Typical situations are the kinds of things that we all deal with. It's, I have a teenager. It's, I have an older parent. Maybe I have a teenager who has the disease of addiction. Maybe I have a marriage issue. Maybe I have a physical condition going on, or I've been injured and now I'm getting depressed because I'm not at full functioning. Maybe it's that I have, this much to go on my plate, and my plate's this big, and I'm overloaded, and my previous ways of coping are not working as well as they could. Sometimes we find that officers get really caught up in the adrenaline of the job, and they lose sight of where they're carrying stress. So one of the things we do a lot is to work with officers on identifying, how do you know when you're getting stressed out before you're way up here? Can you feel it in your stomach? Can you feel it in your shoulders? Do your hands get, where do you feel that? When you can identify that at a lower level and intervene in that, then we can help them manage their stress at a lower level. So it's really the whole gamut that we're seeing on officers coming through the door and dealing with, and it's a lot of life stuff that we're all dealing with.
And so are the life situations treated any differently than the post-traumatic situations that might emerge?
It really depends on the situation. We are always going to assess for any critical incident stress or traumatic stress that an officer has as a result of anything that they've been through. We'll screen for that. We'll ask about that. Sometimes they'll say no, or we won't find anything. Sometimes we'll find that they'll readily identify something or some things. Sometimes we'll talk with them in the course of them talking about their family situation or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden they'll talk about a situation perhaps that they were in many years ago that they thought they had dealt with, that they thought had put away, but for whatever reason it comes out of the box, so to speak, and it's present again and it's bothering them. So we'll help them talk through that to put that to the side again so they can focus on today and that event won't interfere in their lives.
Thank you.
Do you make referrals for EMDR?
We do. We use EMDR a lot, and EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a really effective technique. Two of us on staff are trained in EMDR, but we really work within our scope. So our scope is not to go into intensive treatment. If we have an officer who has traumatic stress, EMDR is a really effective treatment, and we would probably refer them out to a provider in the community that practices EMDR. It's a great technique that is a lot shorter than traditional talk therapy is, that helps the brain kind of reprocess an event, so that obviously we can't change events that have happened in the past, but we can get the brain to look at it in a different way. So instead of thinking about this event that was really upsetting to me and I'm going like this, I can go through this process, I can think about the event, and I can just kind of go, you know, that was bad, but I can deal with it. It's really effective, and it's great with first responders. Thank you for asking that. Yes, sir.
So my question kind of goes on the heels of that. Earlier, you mentioned you refer to outside organizations that you think do a good job.
We do.
Is there a standard, or is that a contract that you have, whether the city has, or EAP or CPD has?
Through
to
EAP,
identify those agencies?
we try to work with in-network providers. Since our officers have United Healthcare, we try to work with providers that are within that network. There's a separate contract that the department has for psychological services that Chief Quinlan, Director Speaks, may want to talk about now or later. That's separate and that's different. They can go there for traditional counseling if they want as well. So it's part of the array of services that are available. But if it's a fitness for duty, if it's a pre-employment evaluation, that's run separately. And again, typically EAPs are way separate from those functions in any organization. EAPs do not provide fitness for duty, opinions, nor pre-employment. We are there to help the employee, which helps the organization.
Great, and then just one other question quickly. Is the EAP assistance information available during training so that they're made aware? Because my question would be, if a person is not one of the 80 people who comes in and takes advantage of EAP, how do they know when they're reaching these critical stress limits and then
Great question.
Decide to seek help?
So we come in the first week that they're in the academy, and we talked with them for about an hour. We usually have peers with us. What I found is our message carries a lot stronger and is more acceptable to officers when we partner with peers, because it's more credible, other than just a mental health person standing up there talking. So we partner with peers. We go in the first week that they're in the academy. We talk to them. There might be situations during the academy that the recruit staff would have us out to talk with them about. We come back at the end of the academy. We also have a family night or afternoon or morning where we bring families in and we talk to families, because families are going to see identifying things maybe more than that officer will. And so families can use EAP regardless of if that officer wants to or not. And some of our utilization is definitely with family members coming in, maybe bringing that officer with them, maybe not, maybe just kind of learning more about how they can help that officer. We also do periodic roll call visits. We do ride-alongs periodically. We really try to get out there often and have high visibility within the division in a way that is not annoying, but that we have a steady presence. And we found that as we have done that and cultivated those relationships, people come and talk to us because they trust us.
Thank you.
We've been asked as the commission to look at officer wellness. You've been a part of the division for many years. You spearheaded the peer assistance team. Any ideas that you have for the commission on how we can improve officer wellness? Sorry to put you on the spot there. I know that's just.
I think keep doing more of the same. I'm so proud to have been a part of these efforts. We've come so far. I mean, I have been here 31 years, and we've come so far in that time. And I really appreciate the opportunity to work with the division, that we've been invited into the division to participate and assist with these efforts. I think we have to keep that up. We have to keep doing that. We have to keep getting the message out. You know, it's easy to rest on our laurels sometime and maybe not get out there in front of things, and I think we've got to maintain that standard of getting out there and having that steady presence. Off the top of my head, that's what I would say. Yeah.
Are there a set list of things each year that you're looking to improve upon? Is it defined in that way where you're looking at outcomes and measure your successes, or is it just just gonna stay at this pace?
Well, here's what I would tell you, Commissioner. There are 4 of us that work at EAP, and there are 9,000 city employees. We do a lot of legwork within the Division of Police so that we can be effective. And we don't have the staff really or the time to do real detailed analysis of our statistics. If I had somebody to do that, I would love to do that. But if you have me doing that versus helping an officer, I'm going to choose that every time, helping an officer. We do look at our numbers. You know, are our numbers dropping way down? Are they different? Are there any trends there that we need to do some targeted education around? We do client satisfaction surveys. We do those. That's a standard of all Columbus Public Health programs that we receive back anonymously. We don't get a real high rate of return on those, so that is an area that we could do better in terms of our client satisfaction survey returns. The ones that we get back say to us, keep doing what you're doing. We're not perfect, but we're on the right track, I believe, foundationally in terms of what we're doing.
This might be for Chief Quinlan and Director Speaks. Do you all know if part of the outside consultants, if they were looking at any of their stats or anything like that?
I do not know that answer.
Which stats?
The utilization.
The utilization. She said, she just mentioned that they just don't have the capacity right now to do a thorough review of like their stats and information and, you know, to identify like areas of improvement and get a deep dive down into that.
I will find out and report back to the commission.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right.
Great, thanks so
well,
much.
Thank you. So next we will have Commander Rhonda Grizel. Did I say your last name right? Thank you, for Peer Assistant Team. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And good afternoon. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you. Lisa didn't advance me. Let's see. Okay, that's okay. So my name is Rhonda Grizel. I'm a patrol commander currently. Do you remember Commander Greg Bodker of the Internal Affairs Bureau that came to talk to you?
Rhonda, in order to be recorded.
Oh, I'm
sorry.
Sorry. I don't like to stand behind a podium. Commander Greg Bodker is my sidekick on the peer assistance team, but he's currently at a long-term training program. So just to give you a frame of reference, if you remember his face, he is the co-team leader along with me on this team. We coined the name Peer Assistance Team because we like to be able to call it PAT. We figured people would shorten it. Police officers like to use that type of language. So what I heard you talking about was culture. And for a very, very long time in law enforcement circles, the culture was paramilitary, internally, even externally. And kind of had officers are going to deal with whatever comes at them. A stoic exterior, and that was mirrored internally, right? It was expected that you deal with the run that you're on, and whatever happened, and you leave it behind you, and you move on. And that was history. You put it on a shelf, put it in a cup, put it in a box. I think we've had a gradual realization because we've seen suicides, alcoholism, and various other unhealthy behaviors. And it's made this profession stand up and take notice. And so now there's a very, very big push for peer teams, for officer wellness, and these are all the buzzwords that are occurring right now. What I'm happy to say to you is that Commander Bodker and I had this idea in 2012. Actually, before that, we were worried that it may not get the support that it needed at the time with the current person that was in charge. So in 2012, when Chief Ditzelswag took over and Lisa approached us and let us know that then Director Mitchell Brown was in favor of a peer assistance team, we hit the ground running and started to research how to put this in place. So we've been doing this now for over 6 years. And it's been a great means for us to try to help change the culture, to make officers healthier. You can train a person to be stoic on the exterior. You can teach them how to deal with the stress of the job and maintain their composure when they're at work. But when you take the cape off, you take the uniform off, when you go home, there's still a human being there. And we talked about that, or Lisa talked about that, that underneath all of that, there's still a human being. And I think this picture says that very, very well. That was at an officer-involved funeral. And obviously, these emotions run deep. And this would be a time when that cup just ran over, and we couldn't contain it, okay? I never thought about this until I saw this video, and this is a trailer from a documentary called Code 9 Officer Needs Assistance, which I think is very, very interesting. And it's a realization of what it looks like when you're a new recruit, and then what happens over the course of time. So this is pretty short, less than a minute, if you could just take a look at it. Oh, I'm sorry, it didn't go. Here we go.
When I grow up, I want to be a police officer. When I grow up, I want to work for the FBI so I can go on secret mission.
When I grow up, I want to be a detective so I can investigate crimes. I want to be a police officer so I can keep people safe.
Because they're brave and I can help catch criminals.
When I grow up, I want to be a police officer so I can serve my country. I want to grow up being a cop.
Because I want to be in a position of authority.
Because girls can do it too. When I grow up, I want to become a police officer so I can become isolated. I want to be a police officer so I can have nightmares.
So I can see things that no human being should ever see.
So I can become void of emotion.
When I grow up, I want to be a police officer because I want to feel the emptiness inside. I'm so sad all the time.
You can't just toss me
I
aside.
don't understand what's happening to me. I'll never be the same.
I don't even go to family functions anymore.
Disassociated.
Suicide.
They betrayed me.
I'm not a piece of garbage.
No one should have to see what I've seen.
I may not be alone, but I am lonely. Help me. Help me.
So these folks go out every single day and they see things over and over and over in the course of an 8 or a 10-hour shift that most people might see a few times in their lives, okay? And it does build up. The Peer Assistance Team mission statement is there. I'm not going to read it to you. Do you have the PowerPoints in front of you, or?
No.
Okay. We are a voluntary group of trained personnel that provides assistance in times of crisis for Columbus Police personnel. The focus of the group is to minimize the harmful effects of stress, particularly those arising from crisis. In order to minimize these effects, the group will utilize one-on-one peer support, pre- and post-incident education, and/or group incident debriefings or diffusings. It is not the function of the group to replace ongoing professional counseling, but to provide crisis intervention or support with a pathway to professional resources when needed. So we're really trying to teach police officers a new way of dealing with the cumulative effects of the stress of the job, and teach them how to deal with that in a positive way, how to recognize it, and also the acute symptoms that they might experience from traumatic incident exposure. So the facts. The team is trained in critical incident stress management through the International Critical Incident Stress Management Foundation, or ICISF. There's a lot more about that organization on their website. It's similar to a team that the fire department has had for well over 20 years. And I think that was one of the reasons with the EMS background that Councilmember Brown had, his recognition of the utilization of this technique with fire and public safety is why he was so supportive of it. Again, we were established in August of 2012. We gradually added members each year through free training whenever we could because there was no budget for it. We currently have about 90 members. They were trained through a representative through the state FOP who's trained in ICISF and stress management models. And the team members volunteer their time to assist fellow officers. If they are contacted off duty, that's something they're willing to do for their fellow officers. So why is peer support necessary? We talked a little bit about it. It's to build resilience. Officers gain an understanding about stress and how to respond to the inevitable effects in a healthy and positive manner. We're really talking about educating them about the bad things that will happen to you if you keep putting these things away and you don't find a positive outlet. And you also want to be able to recognize the signs and symptoms in yourself because it's going to allow you to serve citizens better. It's going to allow you to be a better family member. It's going to allow you to be a better person in the end of the day. We also are here to deal with chronic and traumatic stress. It takes a physical and emotional toll on police officers to go through these incidents every single day over and over and over again and see this type of behavior. Most of the time, you're dealing with a person who the worst thing that's ever happened to them in their life is that day. We're not getting called because they're happy. They're calling us because they're having a problem. Have any of you ever experienced a high with your adrenaline and then once you're relieved, a complete low? Like maybe almost getting in an accident or someone jumping out from behind a wall and scaring you to death, and then you realize, well, it wasn't real? We can train officers to not react on the external through our training, but it doesn't change the physiology of what happens internally. Those mechanisms of the adrenaline dumps, the cortisol release, and the things that your body goes through is the fight or flight syndrome, and you can't change it. It's primitive. It's bred in us. So we can teach them to react differently and not react to what's the stimulus on the outside unless it's a real one, but we can't change the physiology behind that. And that's what has a long-term effect on police officers. The average life expectancy is probably 7 to 8 years less than what it is for the average person. And that's probably similar for firefighters as well, or anyone else in public safety, medical fields and things like that experience this up and down of the cortisol and the adrenaline. We also have to be aware of vicarious trauma. When you're going in, you're talking to that person who just experienced a rape. We're human beings, so you feel their feelings. You experience that with them. When you go on a fatal traffic crash, you see that person that just maybe was killed in that crash. And you take that home. And these are the little things that happen to you every day that I'm saying you put in that cup, or you put in a box, or you put on a shelf. And before this new push for mental wellness or mental health and wellness, there wasn't that recognition that you just can't keep putting that stuff away and not dealing with it. We respond about 4 different ways. We have one-on-one support, which is a contact between one peer and one officer. Diffusing, it's a small group discussion following a critical incident. Usually it says 8 to 12 here, but it can be up to 24 hours. If there is an incident, I'll use this as an example because the officer self-disclosed this. Do you remember on the east side where the man went into the pond to rescue the little boy and they both passed? We went out and did a diffusing for that. And it was a very positive experience for the people that were at the scene and were involved. We got great feedback that it really helped them process that event. So that would be something that we would do in that regard. That's really actually more of a debriefing. The diffusing would be we would go out the next day at roll call and say, hey, we're the peer assistance team. We put some handouts talking about the signs and symptoms of stress. You guys just had an abnormal event happen. So these are normal reactions. It may not be how you normally feel. They're abnormal or normal reactions to an abnormal event. So that's the incident education that we're talking about. And there's the debriefing that I spoke about with the person passing in the water. It is a 7-step formal process. Sometimes it's called the Mitchell model. It's under ICISF. It is led by a mental health professional. It's a 7-step process, and that can occur. Lisa, they recommend 1 to 10 days, but I think we have found that we really tailor what we utilize for the people that are involved based on what they need. This isn't a one-size-fits-all that because the model says we do this, we go do that. We have constant contact with the chain of command. The sergeants are a great resource because they're seeing those people every single day, and they let us know. Like I may call a sergeant and say, hey, you guys had a really bad homicide scene, multiple victims. Are your officers doing okay? And they'd be like, yeah, Commander, I think they're doing okay. Hey, well, these are the things to watch out for. We'll tell them that at the diffusing when we go to the roll call. These are the things to watch out for. You're going to be our eyes and ears. If you start to see something, you think something more formal happens, let us know, and we'll line that up for you, okay? But it's always based on what the individual needs. Nothing is ever pushed on anyone. Again, I said pre- and post-incident education. We do supervisors training because, like I said, that first-line supervisor, the sergeant, is the person that's there, seeing them every day, seeing what kind of emotional state they might be in before they get to work, whether they were in a rush, whether they were late, whether they're taking time off, those types of things. And despite our efforts across the profession, we notice that police suicides are still at an all-time high and continuing to rise. It's the trend. This is a relatively new effort, in my opinion, in the law enforcement circles, and I think we have a lot of room to grow. In Columbus, fortunately, we haven't had a suicide in a while. We've had one that I know of since the team has been put in place. There's no doubt in my mind that partnering with Lisa and making officers more comfortable and removing the stigma that was built into the profession for so long has stopped people from hurting themselves. There's no doubt in my mind. But our goal is to get someone through a 25-year career providing outstanding service for you and make sure they have a happy retirement, right? Because we don't want broken people. We don't want broken people that can't go and live a happy life after they've served the city. And I'm open for questions.
Go ahead.
One of the questions I wanted to ask is, what type of support do the PATs receive themselves, considering the impact of vicarious trauma?
That's a great question. So we, every January, Commander Bodker and I, Deputy Chief Bash is our executive sponsor. And then we have Lieutenant Dean, Sergeant Suber on what we call the coordinating team. We meet in January with Lisa and we talk about, okay, let's set our regular meeting dates. And we meet probably 4 or 5 times a year for a couple hours at a time, because we have people that work all around, all different shifts, all different days off. So we try to find like a time in the middle of the day, 4 or 5 times a year for a couple of hours where we can get together and talk about scope, talk about what our mission is, talk about any problems that anyone's having. And we also try to have an educational piece related to that. Oftentimes we will talk about self-care. Lisa is very, very good. The peers talk to her directly. They only contact Commander Bodker or I if there's a problem or something they need help with. She's very, very good at helping determine and keeping an eye on peers that she works with routinely, and seeing, noticing if there's something out of character. She'll notice if they've been, busy helping people, and do a self-check with them. And we also try to do education for our team members from time to time to remind them that, hey, it's important to take care of yourselves. And there is no shame in saying, if you've got a lot going on, let us know. We'll take you off the roster. That's happened. Mm-hmm. They let us know when they're through whatever is going on, whether it's a sick family member or other personal issue. They let us know, hey, I think I'm okay to help other people now. I can go back on the roster. Mm-hmm. And certainly in an atmosphere that we're trying to create, that is a welcome relief that someone can recognize that and have that emotional intelligence.
And if I'm in need of support, a peer support, do I go through EAP first, or I can come straight to you all and get that support?
So it happens any way that it happens, we'll take it. Lisa told you that if someone contacts her directly and she feels that a police officer might be a better person to talk to because she hasn't done the job before, she can take our roster and show it to the person and say, hey, is there someone on here that you know? And encourage them to follow up with a peer. Mm-hmm. Sometimes supervisors will call me and say, hey, I think one of these officers is having a problem. Could you find someone for them to talk to? And I'll set about looking at our roster, looking at where the person works, seeing if there's someone. I'll call that peer and say, hey, do you know so-and-so? Would you mind reaching out? Then there's we have our roster posted on the internet. We have them posted in every building and every unit. It gets emailed out to all the commanders. So that roster is out there. They're aware of it. We do various different types of training to always stay current and stay in their minds. We want them to think about us as an option and encourage this as a way to help.
Almost the last question. So are peers, I'm sorry if I'm dominating this conversation also.
You're fine.
They're ready.
Are peers identified or PATs identified so that there is a good foundation across race, gender, and sexuality so that there is some matching that can happen in that way?
Absolutely. We look at lots of things. It's our goal for someone to be able to look at the roster and find someone where they would either have a shared experience. So we look at diversity not only in what we see as diverse, but diversity of assignment, diversity of experience on the department, if they've been involved in critical incidents, if they've had personal tragedy. We have peers that have, it runs the gamut, the experiences that they've had, from significant childhood trauma to family members who've been through addiction, serious personal health crises, loss of spouse, experience of domestic violence themselves. It just runs the gamut. So yes, it is very, very diverse in experience, and we try to make sure, what's really hard is, we move around a lot, right? So trying to make sure that we add people, right now, when we add people, we try to add people on third shift, because in 6 years, we've had people that started out on third shift and they've transferred down or gotten promoted. So we try to make sure that we're always cognizant of that and making sure there are folks available in the bureaus, inside headquarters, crime scene search, wherever. We try to make sure we have people everywhere.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of a follow-up.
No. A couple of follow-ups too. I heard you speak to culture in the beginning around this peer assistance program. And so can you elaborate a little bit more around the culture you're trying to create, or is it culture you're trying to address? I wasn't really clear on what you meant as you spoke to culture. My other question is, how many are part of your team, the peer assistance team? And again, evaluation, successes, what is the ultimate goal you're trying to reach with this team? Are there some measures in place, increasing the amount of officers that are using this? I don't know what the measures are, but I would be curious to know. And I got notes in 2 play. I think that's my biggest questions is the evaluation, how many are on the team, and then when you speak to culture, I think it was either in a slide or in something that you said around you exist to address the culture or set a culture, but I'm not sure if it's to change culture or to establish a culture that's been defined by your team.
Right. Okay, so I was kind of dovetailing. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't read your name.
Yeah.
On the commissioner's comment about wellness and the wave of, do you want to say it? I don't remember the exact words you said.
So I was talking, I think it was the question I had to Lisa about the psychological safety and the culture of safety that is established when people feel safe to express the things that are concerning them.
That's what we're trying to create, okay? Because for a long time in law enforcement, think paramilitary, soldiers, strong, stoic exterior, you go deal with the run, it doesn't matter what it is, it's not gonna affect me. I go back, I go to the next run. It doesn't work. We're human beings, and all of that stuff starts to pile up. And what happens when you don't deal with it, as Lisa says, is it grows roots, okay? So you've heard of PTSD. That trailer was actually a trailer for a movie about post-traumatic stress in law enforcement. There's been a huge recognition that not dealing in a healthy way and learning to deal with the emotional side of the things that you're seeing results in post-traumatic stress. Maybe not disorder, but post-traumatic stress. And eventually, it becomes a post-traumatic stress disorder if you don't deal with that, theoretically. So my goal, the people that do this job, we have the most amount of money and time and training invested in them from the selection process, the civil service testing, the academy. That's a tremendous asset, okay? It's my goal to infuse this ideology into our culture and change it from the paramilitary stoic environment that it was to one that embraces that it's okay to know that that affected you. And this is the way that you can address it and deal with it and move on and be stronger, more resilient, so that we keep you in the game. And we also make sure you're happy when you're there. Does that answer your question? One of them?
I still don't know, is there a set culture you're trying to reach? So it sounds like that you're trying, I think I hear you saying you're trying to raise awareness around trauma, stress, and those type of things, so more
Absolutely.
prevention kind of thing.
Yes.
But I'm thinking from intervention and changing culture based on what exists in our police force or public safety. Is there a focus on changing the culture to address, say officers aren't bought into the idea that focusing on their self-care and mental and physical health is important. Is there a culture shift to that's written in stone that you're trying to embed in the culture that you guys have defined, or is just kind of this loose thing of we're trying to create space to have a dialogue, but we're not trying to reach any tangible goals that can be measured? I guess is what I'm trying to understand.
So yeah, I would love to see us move more towards something that is embedded in the organization. So if you're what you're alluding to me is what's the next step? So there are agencies.
Recommendations. So we exist to make recommendations. And
right.
So now we're speaking about this peer assistance in the EAP program. And so if it's clear to me, I don't know about the other commissioners, is there some goal we're trying to reach to that we can measure to say these are the things that need to happen? Maybe it's that this becomes part of the training. I heard you talk about being a part of the training on the front end and it really being something that you started to bring in.
We do come
when
in.
you started this in 2012.
Yeah,
so.
we do go in and talk to recruits. That's something that we do to be proactive, to introduce them to these concepts and show them right off the beginning that this is something that's embraced within the division. And it was legitimized by giving us, in 2012, giving us the authority to go ahead and start the team. So that was the initial legitimization of it, embracing. If you're asking me what could be the next steps where we show people we're serious about this theory and embracing this change, it would, there are agencies that have wellness bureaus that's what they do. If I had more time, this is an ancillary duty. If I had more time, what would it look like if that was my only job? Every time an officer was involved in a traumatic incident, I would send them signs and symptoms. I would reach out personally. I would try to negotiate. We've already met with the FOP to talk about wellness check-ins. It was midterm bargain, or they weren't doing any midterm bargaining and weren't willing to talk about it because the contract was up for negotiation, not to get too in the weeds, but we have approached and talked about some kind of wellness checkup. What would that look like? We didn't get very far in the discussions. That would be something that I could see in the future. More opportunities to do more training, because everything that we do now, I have to try to fit it in with all my other duties that I'm already doing. Does that help?
It does.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to get to is, I think you hear where I understand where I'm trying to go, but to be able to measure it, I think it's important for us to figure out if we're going to really be able to get to change, we have to have a tangible thing to measure. So that's the point I was really trying to make, if that helps you understand where I was trying to go.
So I can tell you anecdotally that Lisa has indicated, because of her partnership with us and the acceptance that brings, and you got a law enforcement officer saying it's okay. So when you're looking to hire a contractor, do you just go in there cold, or do you find someone that your friend says, I used that contractor and it was a great project and it turned out really, really well? Does that get you to buy into that contractor maybe a little bit more than just somebody from the internet without any? That's what we do for her. We say to her, it's okay to talk to Lisa. Lisa's great. Lisa understands what you're going through, okay? So we get that buy-in. She says anecdotally, because of HIPAA, her utilizations have gone up, okay? If you're asking me about utilizations in general through us, we have increased utilization since inception, year to year. Commander Bodker is the stats guy, and I don't have the stats, though. I can tell you that last year, because that was the only one I saw, we had over 1,000 101 contacts, but that's 90 people over the course of 365 days. I don't think there were any formal debriefings, and there may have been a couple of diffusings. Yeah, go ahead.
So the other thing potentially that we could look at if we got really sophisticated and we had more resources would be attendance. would be maybe retaining officers, tracking an officer who is involved in a traumatic incident, and looking down the road at what happens to their health care utilization, what happens to their attendance, and all kinds of things job-related that we could track if we had the resources and the time and the ability to do that.
So we had a vendor in several meetings ago. You would be in need of such a database to be able to track that.
And in a perfect world, if you could tie this in with the early warning system with ears, my gut's telling me that some of the problems with stress might lead to some complaints or maybe they don't handle things quite the way we would prefer that they handle, and they get a complaint or they get more uses of force than another peer that's similarly situated in a similar assignment. You would use the early warning system with EAP and possibly a wellness unit to help reach out to that person and be more proactive. But at this point, there's not enough of me to go around to try to do that for 2,000 people. Sir?
So the diffusing and the debriefing, this is strictly for officers following a critical incident. Is there, other than the introduction of care, which I know we're going to hear about later, is there any space currently for engagement between the officers who were involved in the critical incident and the community members? Not necessarily the person who we believe might be responsible, but for those who witnessed it. The lady who was sitting on her porch because I think that in some of these higher risk communities, I don't know how it's the politically correct term to describe it, but where the crime is the highest, we are seeing a lot of the same things that officers are seeing.
Vicarious trauma. Yep.
That's right. And I would go ahead and say at a high rate, because everything that happens, the police don't get called.
Right. So
And so I'm wondering about how and just to finish the question, because if you train an officer to deal with the stress, but then you send them back into the same toxic environment, how effective are we in the long term at offsetting what their experience is and not causing the trauma to build and compile so that we have the same outcomes?
Well, I understand that, but that's what we signed up for. Okay? Mm-hmm. So we know we're going to have to go back. Mm-hmm. Okay? It's just, and we've got the training to do it, but these are giving us skills to be able to keep going back because they want to. They want to be there. We just have to make them more cognizant of what it's doing physically and emotionally.
Right. And so let me back up, because what I wanted to say also before I made that question was thank you for fielding these questions, because I know how I can feel to be on the hot seat.
I don't feel on the hot seat at all. I enjoy talking about it.
It speaks to your passion and your commitment. But I think it goes back to something kind of to go to Commissioner Fournier-Alzada's question is the warrior versus guardian mindset and that transition that you guys mentioned that is taking place or that you're working toward having that transition manifest. But the other thing, the root of my question is rooted in the report from President Obama's Office of 21st Century Policing and how the first pillar of that report was that there has to be some means of reconciliation between our, communities of color, marginalized communities, and law enforcement. And so that was really the root of my question about how we look at not just the officer's training and his or her preparedness to go back into those settings, but how we begin to also alter the setting that they're going back into, because that will, I believe, take us a step closer to the reconciliation that is mentioned as the first pillar in 21st century policing.
I kind of have an answer for you a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So the mayor's comprehensive plan for the neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. The CARE Coalition, and Director-in-Chief can... Oh, okay. So after a traumatic incident or a homicide, various different city resources come to that neighborhood. We'll go knock on doors, social workers, and try to talk to the people that live in that area. Over the summer, several times, I had officers go down. I'm over 13 precincts, which is far south. Go and knock on those doors with the folks that are going door to door. So there is an officer presence with them in a very different scale. It's very much community related. It's not in an enforcement capacity at all. Summer Safety Initiative. They're on bicycles, they're out there, they're gathering intelligence, finding out about, because sometimes what we think a community needs isn't what that community needs. And so that's why we put officers out there on the bikes to identify what's important to the homeowner, what's important to the person that lives here. What do the residents want to see us doing? And so we listen to that feedback, and then we try to implement what they're concerned about. What we heard a lot on 13th Precinct was they were really upset about all the illegal dumping. Believe it or not, I mean, there are lots of rental units there, and unscrupulous landlords sometimes use those big trash cans to dump things. And it's a big source of frustration for folks there. So Emerald Hernandez, I don't know if you've talked to her or met her, she was instrumental in helping us get code and get that cleaned up for them. And they were so happy about it. I don't know if I helped, but I think there are things in place.
You know I'm very familiar with CARE.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's what I was, yes, I do. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
So the sort of debrief incidents that you described after a major incident, that's kind of piggybacks on our last question, is do you ever have community members that may have been a part of that traumatic event there with the officers in the precinct that responded?
No, because that's not the Mitchell model. The Mitchell model is a 7-step process for the people, meaning the law enforcement aspect or the fire aspect, public safety aspect, that's directly involved in that. Honestly, I think that's great to consider that for the community, maybe having something like that for the community, but I don't know how vulnerable public safety people would be in front of a citizen. I mean, we want them to talk about their feelings and their perceptions and how it made them feel. We have a hard enough time. We're just trying to get us to accept the fact that we're allowed to feel these emotions, right? I'm pretty sure that would be very difficult for them to talk about it in front of someone they're supposed to be strong in front of.
So you mentioned that the team started in 2012, and I'm just curious, is there like a generational divide? Are the older officers just as on board with this as the newer officers, or is there a little bit more resistance from the more senior officers?
So I don't think so, because I think so mental health is much more accepted, as you point out, with younger folks. It's not a big deal to go to a counselor. It's not a big deal at all. The older officers have been through some stuff, and they've seen their peers possibly commit suicide or lose their job because of alcoholism, or maybe even die from alcoholism, and felt those problems themselves, lost a marriage because they shut down and they don't deal with things emotionally, and their spouse looks at them like they're crazy because they don't react the way that normal people do. It's okay. I think they accept it because they understand, they know, they've been through it, they feel it. We even started having the recruits read a book called Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement by a guy named Kevin Gilmartin. And it talks about the maladaptive behaviors that you can develop, just cordoning yourself off from your feelings and not having reactions, and the problems that it can cause for you at home. We had their spouses read it, or significant others. And I think that's a great thing. This is a process. We're turning the Titanic, right? But it is easier with younger people because they are more acceptable, more accepting of it.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It looks like we're a little ahead of schedule, so we can go ahead and take a break right now for 15 minutes. So we'll come back at, what is it, 3:08? It was 15 minutes from then. 3:25. Let's just add 2 more minutes onto that. All right, 3:25. Let's go ahead and get started. We have, I don't know if this is working. It is. Chief is coming back. we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to change gears just a little bit here because Vlad has to leave a little early. So we're going to go ahead and go with the subcommittee report for hot topics. Let me check all the other subcommittees. Do we have somebody giving a report for training? That's a no. And 21st Century Policing, we actually don't have a report. Tracy, Olitha, y'all have anything to report?
No.
Okay. And then hiring. Is anybody giving a report for hiring?
Yeah, it'll be brief, but yeah.
Okay, so we'll go with Vlad, and then we'll go with yours.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you for making that change to the agenda. So we had our first meeting last week, and we decided that probably realistically, with the 2 months of work, we could cover at most 4 topics. And we also further decided that we're just going to have each one of us take charge of one of them and maybe do some research, reach out, maybe schedule a meeting, bring people in to educate us about the topics. So the topics that we're going to cover is the number one kind of big overarching topic is building trust and legitimacy with the community. And Tammy has agreed to take charge of that kind of in general. But within that, we also wanted to focus on specific questions. One was something that we're going to do collectively is looking at other models for investigating not just officer-involved shootings, but also other serious or, quote, egregious complaints that don't involve internal affairs, maybe outside agencies, what the challenges are, logistical challenges, how other departments are able to do it, maybe haven't been able to do it, again, as a way of building trust with the community. Tiffany has agreed to look at specifically building trust amongst juveniles and new Americans, and Emily provided us some contacts that I think we're following up with. So Reggie is really interested in innovation in policing and looking specifically at technologies, programs, and processes that are new and looking at kind of models of innovation that work. And then the last topic that I'm going to take charge of is looking at kind of IT and data systems in terms of interoperability, function, and officer time and productivity.
Thank you. So let me make sure I got these topics right. Trust and legitimacy, juveniles and trust.
And new Americans. Juveniles and new Americans.
Oh, and new Americans. Okay. Innovation and data systems.
Yep. And then the last one is within legitimacy, using external agencies to investigate not just deaths or officer shootings, but all kind of serious or egregious potentially issues.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Sean.
I am here reporting on behalf of Andrea Morbitzer, our chair of our subcommittee, and we are at the point of synthesis and developing our recommendations as a subcommittee. And so we've established 3 additional meetings after our first round of meetings where we'll kind of go into the recommendation process. We did request 1 additional meeting with Randall Sistrunk to discuss the diversity and inclusion efforts of the division in the city. So he'll be coming back out to meet with us to just talk a little bit further about some of the things he shared with us as a full commission body. And so then we'll have kind of a game plan for how we'll develop some final recommendations. We did, however, send, and Emily and Aaron, please chime in, we did, however, send a message to our chair about us having some external conversations with the rest of the commission so that we can have some feedback from you all prior to us developing our final recommendations, and so that we can kind of hear where your conversations have gone, and you can hear kind of where our conversations have gone so that we can kind of synthesize collectively. In addition to that, we thought it was important because we need to have some conversation around some of those topical issues that might be going on in the community that we have not yet had as an internal commission. So that's kind of where we are. So we're kind of finishing up our process, but we wanted to have a moment where we can stop and check in and have some conversation amongst each other before we made some final recommendations back to the full commission. So that's kind of where we are in our process.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Everybody's plugging along. This is great. All right, now we are going to.
I'd like to ask a question as a member of the public. I'm confused about the committees are going to release recommendations prior to receiving the matrix recommendations.
No.
So the question was, are the committees going to receive information prior to the matrix recommendations? I don't believe that is so, but that is a question that Chair Jackson would probably answer better than I could. So I'm sorry.
That's okay. My question was, though, would committees be releasing recommendations prior to receiving the recommendations and all the data that's been collected from Matrix? And to me, it just would seem like you'd have silos if you didn't have the two processes inform each other. So
Right, and that's why I said I can't give you a definitive answer, but I'm sure it would probably be upon us receiving information from Matrix before it's disseminated.
I think that's kind of the point that Commissioner Carter is trying to get to, just to add to that, is that if we are going to have these subcommittee meetings that are going to make recommendations, and then we have Matrix making recommendations, and there's no place for us to all come together so that there's one set of recommendations, then I would like to add to that, then we have these siloed recommendations, and actually we're doing triple work because we have three sets of people getting to the same outcome without a place in the center for it to come merge together. So I would definitely second what a member of the audience, Debbie, is asking, and I think that we do need to get a follow-up answer, and that be in the minutes. And that has been my concern in taking a while to even choose a subcommittee, because we're doing all this work here in the committee, and then there's subcommittees, and then there's the matrix. And so how do we tie all of these things together? How do we not duplicate efforts, recognizing that all of us are busy, and we want to be able to get to, I know I speak for all the commissioners, to real outcomes and recommendations at the end of this work.
All right, thank you. We will take note of all of that, and so I'll relay that to Chair Jackson, and then we'll probably in an email be able to give everybody an update on where we are with that. All right, now we're going to have a presentation from the chaplain program by Lieutenant Haley. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Amy Haley, and I believe Commander Grizzell talked about ancillary duties. So my full job is an internal affairs first shift lieutenant. So this is an ancillary duty for me as the division's chaplain coordinator.
can you state that again? Internal affairs.
I'm the first shift internal affairs lieutenant. So why does the Columbus Division of Police utilize chaplains? I think you've heard from my peers here that officers are confronted with situations that create emotional, mental, and spiritual burdens. These burdens also affect the officer's family and other members of the department. It's well known that the soul is a vital part of the mind, body, and soul makeup of an individual. EAP, division psychologists, and peer support, we're already serving the mind of the employee. A full-service physical fitness program, which you'll hear about later, offers free workout facilities, personal trainers, and incentives. The third leg, the soul, was lagging behind these otherwise robust legs of the wellness stool. An officer's pastor or religious advisor in private life is not necessarily abreast of the particular problems and dangers faced by police officers. Although trained in ministry, many clergy have not been exposed to the situations law enforcement officers face. Having faith counsel already versed in police culture reduces any gaps in ministering to those in need within the division. So, chaplains have always been a part of the division's history. It wasn't until recently that we explored better ways to serve the division through the use of chaplains. To your point already, we already saw the need. How can we make it better? In 2014, the division's longstanding chaplain, Reverend Richard Ellsworth, was preparing to end his nearly 50 years of serving the Columbus Division of Police. As the spiritual figurehead for an agency of nearly 2,400 employees, one chaplain could only maintain the ceremonial needs of an agency this size. Capitalizing on the transition, division leadership envisioned expanding the breadth and depth of the chaplaincy program. Their vision included swelling the chaplaincy program to a division-wide ministry, accessible 24/7 to all division employees desiring this level of care. This expansion allowed for greater care, faster deployment, and relational ministry. No longer is the chaplain restricted to one denominational lens. The chaplaincy reflects a wider range of faith backgrounds. And to reflect the value the division places on best practices, standardized training was formalized in the expanded chaplaincy program. Chaplains are required to complete International Conference of Police Chaplains training in the areas of death notifications, law enforcement family, stress areas of management, responding to a crisis, suicide, confidentiality, liability, officer injury and death, ethics, and sensitivity diversity training. So how did we get to this new robust format? So the division solicited via internal communication candidate recommendations from division employees. From these submissions, we mirrored the requirements of the International Conference of Police Chaplains, an organization developed in 1973 dedicated to developing professional chaplains through dynamic education and support. The following standards are required for ICPC membership. Each candidate is required to participate in a background check to ensure that there are no active warrants, criminal protection orders, or criminal history that would reflect negatively upon the agency. A law enforcement chaplain through the ICPC must never have been convicted of a criminal offense involving moral turpitude. So we run them through a background check to ensure that they're not on a sex offender database is pretty much what that means. They're required to participate in a ride-along for firsthand understanding of the role of police officer, as well as to build relationships with those they're serving. They are required to provide a resume that manifests a broad base of experience in professional ministry, and they must have 5 years of ministry experience. Furthermore, they must be certified in good standing and endorsed for law enforcement chaplaincy by a recognized religious body. The ICPC guidelines recommend a law enforcement chaplain should be able and willing to be carefully screened by a local law enforcement chaplaincy committee and/or appointed authorities. The division's committee members were chosen to serve on this committee based on their expressed interest in the program or by their activities and passions for spiritual care. The committee established a conversational interview format that ascertained each applicant's suitability for the position based on the 7 categories of experience, accessibility, sincerity, connectivity, commitment, motivation, and affinity toward law enforcement. The results of this process yielded 10 highly motivated servants that provide support, encouragement, and friendship to all members of the Columbus Division of Police, their families, and the public. While the chaplaincy program is an internal focused wellness program, because of the expansion, the Chaplain Corps has been able to reach out to the respective groups of influence to reach more of the community in which we serve. To be clear, this is an internally focused chaplaincy. However, the unexpected outcomes lend itself to some community healing that these are just a couple examples, but each chaplain has its own flock that they're ministering to. And then when you think about members of a congregation and their circles of influence, they are able better to reach people that wouldn't necessarily be involved with law enforcement and sort of be an ambassador for the division. I wanted to show one of our chaplains who's recently been, he took a new calling to Australia, unfortunately. He was really great at helping with community relations, and he organized he saw some tension in the community, and he organized a group of chaplains, I believe, or a group of pastors. I believe, Pastor Ridley, you were part of that group. Is that correct?
Yeah. You're talking about Pastor John Boston?
Yeah, that came to just a day of communication and healing. He wanted to be that bridge builder between his community and the agency. And I will.
We always try to keep a distance from people. Sometimes the thing, you see people come up and the officer might say, hey man, get back, get back, get back. Now, you're in my business zone, and people don't sometimes understand. When things calm down, I would like for officers sometimes to say, hey man, sorry I had to do that. This is what I was dealing with. Sometimes we'll run through the neighborhood and say, everybody get in their house. I wish sometimes we didn't get on the video and say, hey, sorry folks, I didn't mean to be so rude, but this is what we had going on. That doesn't happen. That comes across as being rude.
We have pastors from all over Ohio who came in from the Allegheny West College. We even had guests from Kettering Church over near Dayton, Ohio. And we came together to talk with, as a matter of fact, every single member of the Executive Council of the Division of Police from the city of Columbus, the capital city in the state of Ohio. They all came, including the Chief of Police, Kim Jacobs. And we had this dialogue because it's important. If we're going to lead our community, we got to lead together. We got to have good understanding. And so I am grateful for every single person that came together and for the confidence and the vision of police allowing this to happen. Now we're going to go back. We're going to start affecting a change and a difference in the conversation that's taking place. So it's starting off right now.
Man with a gun, male white, black shirt, camo shorts. You do it, you believe a reasonable police officer will grade versus connoisseur problem. So what is that? Black t-shirt, camo shorts.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, I need you to drop that gun. Why? Sir, I need you to drop that gun.
Tell me about it. What did you just experience?
They have business split, so they got to make decisions. And that's what really got to me.
Mean to you? Like, I guess it really kind of puts you, because in the two scenarios, I got shot. When I got shot, the gun was pointed at me, I got shot in the front. You were supposed to be the officer. I was supposed to be the officer. I was a police officer. And I got shot both times. They said, in the third scenario, that's a scenario where nobody's trying to shoot at you. But I was already very jumpy when I went in, because I just got shot at twice. So I guess I kind of understood it. Like, when you walk into scenarios, you genuinely don't know what's going to happen.
I hope that you know a lot more police officers after today, and I hope that you have some of those phone numbers, officers, if you need to give somebody a call. You know, this is a microcosm of the things that we train our officers in. There's, as Commander Meter, I believe, said, hundreds of thousands of hours of training that we provide to our officers, and we can't possibly get it all informed to you in 3 hours. But we hope that you got an idea of the passion that we have for getting our officers prepared to deal with some of the things that they face. And in addition to this, they face, you know, the mentally ill, they face traffic accidents and traffic dangers, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So the fact that you've invested this time is important to us. We want to be available to you. We are your police agency if you're from Columbus, and hope that you can get this kind of information from your own police agency if you're from another town.
I wasn't really sure what to expect when I came here, but I was very much surprised to hear the openness of dialogue, be able to ask serious questions, legitimate questions that are really hard to African Americans across the country, and to hear them kind of answer. What I hope is that more dialogue like this can take place. We can sit in spaces and not rush and just deal with the hard stuff. I feel like a lot of those are done today. Not all of them. I feel like it's impossible to do all of them in this space and time. So continued conversation needs to be had, but all in all, I think this was a wonderful experience. And I'm looking forward to it.
I thought it was a great opportunity to get a different perspective and a different feel for what police officers are having to face within our community. Often conflict occurs when we see things only from our perspective and not the other person. Today, the police department took us through a process of actually being in their shoes. There were a number of different scenarios that we went through, and how quickly circumstances can change. Officers are human. It's clear that many of them are a part of the department simply because they want to be a service to others. And just as there are bad apples in every profession, there are bad apples in the police department. But I am very moved by the fact that this department, the Columbus department, is very intentional in terms of making sure that they are a service-oriented group. And I really appreciated the opportunity to learn from them.
So thank you for allowing me to sort of speed through my presentation so you could see that. I just thought it was a beautiful example of how this chaplaincy has blessed us and blessed the community, and how I could show you letters, emails from the other chaplains and different sorts of communication that they have with their circles of influence. And I'm open for questions.
Yes,
thank you. Thank you for reminding me, Chair. Wow. So Community Outreach Solutions, is that, in the beginning of the presentation slide, that was the title. Is that, what, can you elaborate more?
The division did not produce that video.
I'm sorry?
The division did not produce that video. That video was produced by one of our chaplains, John Boston, to reach the community of Seventh-day Adventist pastors, and he was trying to minister outward to his circle of influence.
Okay. So that Community Outreach Solutions was produced by the clergy?
No, that was the female voice that you could hear in the video was Pastor Boston's wife, Carla.
Okay.
And that's her background.
This was just a way to show you how the chaplains are ministering to the larger community in addition to CPD.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what I'm trying to get to, because I was trying to get clarity on several.
But that's actually my first time seeing the video, but yeah, she did that.
She produced it, okay.
Yeah,
because the cover of the video was me. Like, the Columbus had enough video. It was a bunch of people that were in the streets for a reason. And so I was so confused in watching it. I think I missed most of the video because I thought it was about you, the chaplain, chaplain's office, your office, I believe.
So
internally
Pastor
reaching out to the
Boston
community to heal these things, but this was done through the faith community. It didn't have anything to do with the work of your office. Is that that's my question?
No, it did. He reached out to me. He's until he moved to Australia, he's one of the division's police chaplains. Voluntary.
I know Pastor Boston.
Okay.
Yeah.
He reached out to me and said, look, I am fielding all of these questions from my faith community. What can the division do to get the truth, get real practical answers to my faith community? And so the division partnered with his faith community. I was trying to show you how the chaplains can bridge gaps between the division and each of their circles of influence. Rabbi Berman regularly is a bridge builder with the Jewish community in Columbus, and I have other examples of that. So that was just one example, and I was given 20 minutes, so I couldn't possibly have provided you all with every example. I thought that sort of encompassed the wellness presentations you would see, in addition to the chaplaincy program and some of the unique ways that it's being used.
Okay. So, to be clear, the Seventh-day Adventist Church reached out to the chaplain office in the police department to get to this point?
No, the division's chaplain,
reached out to
Chaplain
them.
Boston, reached out to me.
Okay.
And he said, I'm hurting. And I am receiving some pushback from my faith community because I'm a Columbus Police chaplain. And I'm hurting, I'm being persecuted in my own community. How can I share this with them? And he reached out to the larger Seventh-day Adventist faith community, invited them in. I reached out to folks like Tracy Shaw at the Training Academy to develop real-time scenarios for them. Is that clear?
And I would just add too, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church did not sponsor that video.
Okay.
That was just wholly
Yes.
him and his wife.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
Yes. So, Pastor Ridley, do you think that that had the desired effect, since you participated in it, in bridging that gap between those people who might have been bringing those pressures to bear?
No. And I appreciated the training, but I felt like, and as I say, I mean, this was the first time I've seen the video. Me and Pastor Boston, we were really good friends. But I felt like it only kind of told just one side of the story. There were several of the clergy there, and myself included, who appreciated the training and what took place, but we still left there not satisfied with some of the things that and one of the parts in the video you saw me sharing in the video, and I was like just talking to an officer, is because there was an incident, and I know it's not Columbus, but it was Tamir Rice in Cleveland, and the officer was explaining, trying to explain that scenario, what happened, and in the middle of the discussion, I raised my hand and I pointed out that, Ohio is an open carry state. And even if there was a call that, someone was in the park or whatever with a gun, I mean, if you pull up on the scene, there's no one else around, there's nothing taking place, aren't there certain protocols, actions that you're supposed to take? Because you can legally be in Ohio, in the state, in public with a gun because it's an open carry state. And when I said that, the officer said, well, let's just talk afterwards. So that kind of ended that discussion, and that's where you saw during a break time, we were just talking and, just going through that. So, I mean, there were different, I appreciated the training, and it does open your eyes to certain things, but to just go off of the 2 or 3 people's interviews who just, made it seem that everyone left in agreement with everything that was said and shared, that was not the way it went.
And the reason why I asked that question is because as in the African American community and in some New American communities, the spiritual leaders hold such gravity in those communities that I know that there's a real opportunity for some transformative conversations that could affect change to take place, using those individuals as that go-between. But it sounds like there's still some questions and some concerns that you had. And I wonder, is there still room through training and through collaboration with the chaplaincy to revisit those concerns?
Well, I mean, if we go back to our very second commission meeting, when we went back at the training academy, we still went through some of this very same similar scenarios, and I still had questions then. So
yeah, and I took some questions from that. So then it brings us to this current moment, which is how do we address those or go back and address those questions?
But that's why
those questions.
And this is the last thing I'll say. But that's why I specified as she mentioned that, you know, the video was not put out by the police department. That's why I specified as well, that it was not put out by our denomination as well.
Again, that was one example of how the chaplaincy is reaching broader communities than other than the division. Just one example.
I had a question really quick, because primarily on that video, we saw pastors of Seventh-day Adventist Church. Do you know what has been done to reach other denominations and other faith-based communities? Are there programs similar to that, or was it just Seventh-day Adventist that's been done?
The chaplain in question, that's his faith community.
Right.
And he was doing that as a service to his faith community. The chaplaincy program is an internal focused program based on the needs of division personnel. If you remember, I said that the chaplaincy is made up of self-identified who the division would like their faith community to be. So it represents the faith community of the division. I do know that other chaplains regularly reach out. I mentioned Rabbi Berman, reach out to their own community to clear up any misconceptions about the police department, because they have a much more accurate view of what's going on in the division than some lay people in their faith community that have no interaction with the division. And that's how that happens. It was just an example. I spent a lot of time talking about internally how they serve us, but it's been really nice that they also reach out to the community at large through their own circles of influence.
So this is pastor program on a wider scale. We have many contacts and meetings with pastors throughout the community. One that O and I are on our safe communities. For example, we have the Reverend Donnell Muhammad and some other pastors on that group. We work often with the Ministerial Baptist Alliance and many others.
Okay,
But
that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, this is the internal focused on officer wellness.
Getting back
to
two recommendations, Director Speaks. So, and this is not directed, I don't know if you want to weigh in or. So it appears to me, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, looks similar to the ABC, looks like ABC's and CPD, similar to that training that was brought to community back when Napoleon Bell and Jeff Blackwell and all first introduced it. It looks similar to that. I didn't go to the academy when we did it as a commission because I'd gone through it. That's traumatizing for me, and I explained that. Getting back to what we can measure in recommendations, which is why we are here, if that's the tool that we're using to engage and to help communities, and that's been my concern from the beginning, and I think that this needs to be noted as the commission, is if we are going to engage the people that we are trying to build trust with, getting back to our subcommittee from the 21st century policing, the number one pillar is building trust, reestablishing trust, and legitimacy between community and police. And so using these types of engagement or contact to the community, it concerns me, and why I started out in my question was the picture in the slide was a picture, I'm in the picture holding the sign, Columbus has had enough. There was a group of people that, not just clergy, that continue to not trust, for however word we want to use to define what our relationship is with policing and in communities. I think that we have to be looking at new, innovative ways to engage. And so anybody knows anything about low-income communities and the black community, most folks aren't in the church. The role of the pastors, and I think I can speak for pastors, is pastors are trying to figure out how to engage with the people around their church. And so I think that we have to get away from thinking that when we engage a certain segment of the community, that we are engaging the community. Because what I was so thrown off by seeing us and me in that first slide, because no one ever came to engage me from the clergy department or the people that we were being represented. And so I think there has been, and I want to give credit to Chief Jacobs, early on after that picture that was shown, I was part of, Aletha and I were talking about at lunch today, where the police department did reach out to the community, and we had a conversation down at the downtown high school that I was part of and other parts of the community. But even in that, the way of engagement cannot be that a set of people set what the engagement looks like, and then the other people come in and participate. It has to be a joint thing, and this is not directed at you, but I think that we need to be, as getting back to recommendations, thinking about how we engage and really digging deeper. You've got a person sitting here that's the commissioner, said he was there and he still has questions. I think we pushed past that too quickly. I think we're more about checking off, we did these trainings, we had these many contacts, and looking at quantitative, is that the right word, Professor? Oh, look at me with my big, as opposed to looking at, is it really impacting change? And are we reaching those that we should be reaching? I think that's where we get off track, because we can't continuously say, and I love the video, a lot of the pastors in the video, I know Pastor Ridley here, and Pastor Boston, actually that picture came from a concern of a community that wound up at Pastor Boston's church. So I met with him. I took a group of people to meet with him. We had dialogue, but we weren't brought to that next step. And so that's what concerns me.
Thank you.
My question was, the chaplain program, you had mentioned that it's based on sworn officers who identified that they would like someone in the program representing their faith. That's how it kind of...
A division-wide announcement was sent out to all division employees asking for recommendations. So we took each recommendation that was submitted and vetted them through our process.
And then those chaplains become chaplains that represent the division?
After the background check, a resume, a ride-along, ensuring the minimum qualifications were met, and then an interview process. If they made it through that whole process, then yes, they are one of our volunteer chaplains.
So they're volunteer chaplains. Do you have an inventory of what denominations or what faiths are represented across that group?
I can tell you what they are, but I want to be very careful. They are not allowed, they're prohibited from converting members of the division.
Sure,
so
yeah.
Their faith, why it's important that they're more diverse is because I might reach out to somebody who has I know they have the same faith background that I have. And so we have Rabbi Berman, obviously he's Jewish. Obviously, you know, we did have Pastor Boston, Seventh-day Adventist. We have the Catholic faith represented. We have the Baptist faith represented. We have the Lutheran faith represented. We have non-denominational faith. And I'm sorry, I don't know what the Grace and Mercy Fellowship Center is. I don't know. I think that's apostolic, the apostolic faith, I'm sorry. So that's what we have.
So recognizing that there's an absence of any Muslim faiths represented, is there any outreach for anyone in the division that might be of Muslim faith? And then the second one is for those sworn officers who might be agnostic or atheists, how are they being supported?
Okay, very, very good questions. We looked at the diversity. In fact, Director Speaks challenged me on that. And it was of those that want this spiritual component available to them, what was important. There were 0 clerics that were recommended. And the only assumption is that the folks that are Muslim in our organization are fine with their own faith situation and wouldn't be reaching out to this program. This program is meant for our officers to reach out. It's not meant for us to push anything on them. I want to be very clear about that when we deal with sort of religion and government. We wanted to be very, very clear that this is a you need to reach out to us sort of service. Your second question went along the lines of atheist representation. And the definition of chaplaincy is contrary to the atheist point of view. So if I'm looking for spiritual help, I'm probably not an atheist because I don't believe that there is a greater power than myself. So I did have one atheist reach out to me, and I encouraged them to reach out to the peer assistance team because that fits more in line with that third leg of the stool. If you're feeling isolated and alone as an atheist in the Columbus Division of Police, I want you to be able to surround yourself with folks of your same mindset and then deal with EAP and the peer counseling team to deal with that particular issue. But the very definition of a chaplaincy program is spiritual support.
Sure.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. But, yeah, I don't want to go into a philosophical debate on that, but I guess the question I have is related to the conversation earlier around psychological safety and vicarious trauma. And if I am represented or I believe in a certain way, and I know these programs exist, one would wonder with these very low utilization rates, what proactive steps can be taken so that those who might believe differently than these largely Christian-based religions feel compelled to engage and have their faith represented, if for no other reason to show the community that there's officers in the sworn rank that believe the way that they believe.
How we address that is they have to come to me and say, my faith is not represented.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to offer up this faith, and I have this candidate that I would like you to interview. That didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea wasn't that we are trying to be everything to the entire division. It was of the people that were interested in a spiritual component, do you have any recommendations?
Mm-hmm.
So we want to be very careful that we are not developing a program that becomes somebody's pastor. That's not what we're here
Sure.
for. We're here for spiritual guidance related to law enforcement function. So where I have a pastor, I probably wouldn't go to him over a law enforcement issue because he has no lens for law enforcement. I would choose one of our chaplains because they have a law enforcement. I'm not going to them. None of them fall in my denomination. And I wouldn't go to them for that, but I would go to them to talk to them about the stresses of law enforcement or, oh my gosh, I've been involved in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
I need you to pray with me. I need you to pray over me. I need you to minister to me and my family because you have that lens that I know can minister specifically to my needs. Just like I don't expect my pastor to be an expert in law enforcement. He has a flock that he can't very well be an expert in everybody's vocation. The same is we are ministering to the vocation, not necessarily individual denominations. But the fact that we have this wide range of denominations makes it way more accessible and way more inviting than having just the one figurehead that showed up at police funerals, police swearing-ins, saying the opening prayer and the closing prayer. I'd never had a one-on-one conversation with that guy for the first 20 years of my career. So this way, it's a more relational ministry. We've got chaplains that, and as God would have it, their ministries sort of go all the way outside of 270. So what they're doing is they're self-deploying to substations just to say hi. They're going on ride-alongs that are closer to where they have their flocks, and they're just developing relationships. They're not pushing anything, they're just saying hi, I'd love to come ride today. A few of them say, hey, if you're interested in prayers, I'll be here. And folks who are do, folks who don't, they don't. So that's how it works. It's developing the relationship aside from the ceremony.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Lieutenant Haley.
Thank you.
Next up, we will have a presentation on officer injuries by Iris Velasco. Did I say that correctly?
She's right outside.
Oh, okay. We're almost done. We got two more presents. This one and one.
Is there a certain port into which I should put it? Plugged it in?
We'll reconvene shortly here.
Who is really good at computers, unlike me?
Oh, we got a couple of screens working. Wonderful. Let's get this show on the road here. So we have Iris Velasco, who's going to talk about officer injuries. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Can you all hear me okay with the microphone? Okay. So I'm Iris Velasco. I'm the industrial hygienist for the division. Has anyone here heard of an industrial hygienist, that role? So I describe it more as occupational safety and health. It's just easier to understand that way. And just to give you some background, I've been doing this job for just a little over 6 years. It's my favorite job ever, and I'm saying the truth there. I spent some time working in the private sector, working for Procter & Gamble and DuPont as a chemical engineer. And then I switched gears and went to graduate school for public health. And then I worked for the Columbus Urban League for a number of years. And that was a very enjoyable experience. This job, I feel like, uses both backgrounds in a way that I never thought was possible. So that's why it's my favorite job ever. So before I dive into officer injuries, I just want to, can you please advance it? Thank you. I just wanted to give a little bit of foundation on what's important to me for any program that I do. So because of my background, any program needs to be technically sound. It needs to be based on data, implemented using project management, and evaluated for effectiveness. We have 2,350 sworn personnel and civilians, so that's such a big group that I'm a fan of the pilot project. So whenever I'm trying out a new idea, I'll start with something small and then get input and scale it up from there, and that seems to work for an agency of our size. Equally important to being technically sound, programs need to be user-driven. So before I got to this job, I had very little experience in law enforcement, so I spent a lot of time talking to officers, getting out in the field, and finding out what needs do you have and what do you think the solution needs to look like. So in that way, it kind of gave me automatic buy-in from talking to people, and they were already invested in the situation and the program. My work is very internal in that my customers are the police employees themselves, but my firm belief is that when officers are safe, the community is safe, and I'll continue to reiterate that point in the programs that I'm going to talk about. So moving on to injury management, our injuries are tracked from Bureau of Workers' Compensation claims. So we look at claims that are allowable by the Bureau, and then of those, how many lost days there are from those claims. And most of our injuries are from a category known as bodily reaction and exertion. So some examples are straining a muscle in physical training as a recruit or a staff member, running after a suspect and twisting an ankle on uneven ground, or handling heavy equipment and pulling a muscle. So it is true that some injuries are not preventable. I mean, they're officers, it's dangerous work, it's kind of the nature of the job, but some injuries are preventable, and so my ongoing challenge is looking for those opportunities. One newer initiative that we have is called Functional Movement Analysis, or FMA. An FMA is typically conducted by an exercise physiologist, a physical therapist, or an athletic trainer, and it uses 7 different functional movements that you can see on the screens here. So basically, it's just looking for imbalances or weaknesses that people may not even know they have. Especially from a previous injury, people might be holding, a muscle or a body part a certain way, kind of favoring it and not knowing, so the FMA kind of highlights that. And then it picks the highest priority issue and then gives an exercise prescription, so then the user can work on that and hopefully get stronger and better. So right now we are doing a pilot with 50 officers going through the FMA, and we've had really good feedback. They're following along their prescription, they are rating the program as good, and they are also recommending it to other people. Another opportunity with injury management is to continuously monitor recruit injuries to suggest maybe modifications to exercise plans or even protective gear. And Officer Shaw can attest to the fact that these are recruits, they're going to get injured. This is very rigorous training for them that some of them have never done before. So there is some injury to be expected, but we're looking for opportunities all the time to try to make it better and safer. Also, you're probably aware that our class size has increased from 35 to 50, and there's 2 classes per year. So just by the sheer number of recruits that we have, more of them are getting injured, but we have opportunity there as well. And then transportation accidents are another big category. Looking at this picture, this is a freeway officer who was hit in the back on the freeway responding to a run. And sometimes the officer is rear-ended, sometimes they're hit by an oncoming car that does not yield when the officer is running lights and sirens. These accidents can be devastating, and they result in the officer not being able to respond to that emergency call. So we need the community's help in driving mindfully, minimizing distractions, and allowing us to respond to those emergencies safely. So when we are safe, the community is safe. Finally, officers get exposed to bodily fluids, mainly blood and saliva, needle sticks, and infectious disease like tuberculosis. The risks from blood and needle sticks are HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. So when the officer is exposed, the source is tested if possible, and then the officer completes follow-up testing over a period of time to make sure they are safe. The division has fitness centers at the academy and headquarters that are open to any division employee. We also have centers at SWAT, the heliport, and internal affairs, and these are only for those employees because those facilities are more secure. The equipment gets regular preventive maintenance to keep it in good shape, and then every year I survey the users to find out what additional equipment they might need or want. So we have installed user-specific equipment like sandbags for SWAT, inversion tables for sore backs from wearing the gun belt and the internal vest, and incline ab roller machines to increase core strength. Sworn personnel also complete an annual physical fitness test, or PFT, which is required for anyone hired after January 1st, 2008. Last year, about 80% of our sworn personnel took the PFT, including about 1/3 who were required to take it and then 2/3 who were not. The PFT consists of upper body strength, lower body strength, sit-ups, and flexibility, and there are levels of achievement based on gender and age. The PFT also includes a self-report health risk appraisal with questions about diet, nutrition, exercise, mental health screenings, and lifestyle. And then there's a personalized report giving areas of improvement. And studies show that when people can do a self-report health risk appraisal and then get individualized feedback from that, it can be effective in improving their health. Lastly, try to complete this sentence. I'm sure you've heard it before. Sitting is the new smoking. Okay. So studies are mixed on the benefit of standing desks, but we know that any kind of movement can be beneficial for health. And standing at your desk can encourage movement because you're already up, so it's easier to move around from there. So we have installed standing desks in several workspaces, and the movement will only continue. Regarding uniforms, the division is increasing protection of its officers with ballistic items. Patrol officers are being outfitted with ballistic helmets, shown in that picture to the left, to better protect their heads during civil disorders or other events. We are also looking into ballistic shields, which is the picture in the middle, to provide cover when other cover, like vehicles or buildings, is not available. We're doing a pilot project on external ballistic plates inside vest carriers to rapidly deploy and provide more protection in certain situations. And the intent is not to give off a certain appearance or a look. The intent is to provide our officers with the right protection they need for whatever situation they're going into, so they can protect the community and do their jobs. So in the last slide, I mentioned sore backs from wearing the gun belt and internal vest. The gun belt with all of its equipment weighs about 25 to 30 pounds. This is a lot of extra weight, and it's sitting right on the hips. So no matter how strong someone's core is, all of that extra weight getting in and out of the cruiser, running after a suspect, it takes a toll over the years, and it actually doesn't take that long for a new officer to start to feel the effects of that. So many of our personnel have bad backs and injuries as a result. Some officers have started using a suspender-style system that literally shoulders the weight on the upper body instead of directly on the hips. These seem to help, but we need more of a solution. Adding to the problem of the duty belt is the internal vest. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm still on the one before. The internal vest, which houses our body armor. Each officer wears an undershirt, the internal vest carrier, a uniform shirt, and then the duty belt on top of that. The internal vest can be hard to adjust with the straps. It can be complicated, and then it does not stay in place. So when the officer moves even to type over a keyboard or walk or do anything like that, it can move, and it's really hard to adjust because it's underneath everything. So then the officer has to deal with the discomfort. And then add a hot summer day and all these layers plus body armor sitting nearly on your skin. So one potential solution that we are just in the very, very early stages of exploring is a vest cover system that includes duty belt suspension. Agencies like Toledo and Bexley have gone to this type of system with great success in back relief and officer morale. This uniform shirt looks almost identical to our current uniform, except the body armor is slipped into the outer vest, which is that first picture on the left. And then it's worn over kind of a shell, so it looks just like a uniform shirt. The body armor is not sitting on your skin or weighing you down, and adjustment is not an issue. The added duty belt suspension system, which is the picture on the right, helps to distribute all of the weight. Again, this is very exploratory at the moment, but we need to do better for our officers and ease their injuries. The division has a drug-free safety program that includes random testing, mainly for sworn personnel for both drugs and alcohol. The program also includes initial and annual training for all employees on drug-free workplace. The training covers the drug-free policy, the impact of substance abuse, addiction warning signs, and how to get help. I'm the one who provides the initial training to each recruit class, and I talk about how this topic can affect their job as police officers. We all know that being in law enforcement is a very stressful job, and some people think it's that significant critical incident that can be a risk to the officer's health. While that might be true, it's also the cumulative trauma from smaller incidents that builds up over time. This trauma can cause an officer to deal with stress in not so healthy ways. Another risk to the officer and their stress is a long-term on-duty injury that causes them to be off work and disconnected from the job and the social support it brings. So the message I give recruits is watch out for each other, starting in the academy and all their years to come. The recruits spend 29 long and very intense weeks together, and they forge strong bonds that become like family really fast. So I encourage them to uphold that family, be on the lookout for signs in their fellow family member that something might be wrong, be strong enough to say something, and be that ongoing support when an officer is off injured. Finally, the drug-free safety program includes referrals to the Employee Assistance Program, or EAP. I know that you heard from Lisa Callender on the EAP earlier this afternoon. The EAP is a wonderful service for our employees. The counselors have experience working with law enforcement, and they meet officers on their schedules, which is great, especially for those who work third shift and otherwise feel isolated from services. Police usage of the EAP climbs steadily each year, and most go on their own, which is great. It's better to go early in a problem before it gets bigger and referrals become more direct or even mandated. The next program is called the Stress Resilience Training System, or SRTS. So this is a fairly new program, and it was developed initially for the military. Right now it's only available on an iPad as an app, and it includes training on stress and its effects, heart rate variability biofeedback via an ear sensor, and then HRV controlled games. So if you look at that graph, the one on the red is your heart rate variability, and somebody who is stressed out, their heart rate is going all over the place. Someone who is breathing and is calm and is able to kind of control their heart rate has more of that steady up and down. So that's what the whole heart rate variability thing is all about. So this app uses an ear sensor, and it's clipped onto your lobe, and it will help you see how you can control your heart rate variability just by breathing. So a couple years ago, we did a pilot project, and radio went first. So about 10 dispatchers did the app for about 6 weeks, and then patrol went, and then a group of detectives in kind of like an administrative role did the program. And they had really, really good feedback. There was one radio dispatcher who said she was on a 10-3, which is an officer in trouble call, and normally she would have sheer panic and have to take a break and kind of be affected for the rest of the shift. But then another person who was doing the program with her said, just breathe, just do the techniques from the app, and she was able to control her breathing in just a minute and then be fine. So that was really good feedback. And then a patrol officer said that she got her highest score ever doing firearms training because she was doing the breathing exercises. And then another officer was on a barricade with his rifle, and he was doing the breathing, and he said he was very steady and not shaking at all like he normally would be. So after the project, I would encourage the people that even though the program is done, to continue the breathing. There are lots of other apps that can be used available on a phone to continue that breathing. And then one radio person just told me about one that he continues to use. So this is something that I'm wanting to continue and to expand on looking into other groups. There is a participant who changed assignments from a detective role to a more tactical role, and he said he's using the techniques there and it's really helping him, so I think we have a lot more opportunity with this program. So moving on to first aid and life-saving, we know that a typical first aid kit in an office has maybe Band-Aids, maybe some antibacterial stuff. Well, we know that's not going to cut it, right? For officers, we need a whole lot more than that. A few years ago, we had self-aid, buddy aid training, and we learned how to use very critical trauma supplies like a combat application tourniquet or CAT, a chest seal, which can be used to prevent a sucking chest wound, and then an Israeli bandage. I actually brought a couple of samples here. So this is the combat application tourniquet, and it's great because you can apply it to somebody else or even yourself. It's a one-handed operation, so you can save your arm or your leg by using that. The Israeli bandage is also good because it has a dressing that when you wrap it around, it automatically compresses, and it's really good for trauma. And then it has a closure that prevents you from having to use anything else. It's just like a one-stop shop in that bandage. So the officers were trained on all that stuff, and then the items were added to first aid kits in cruisers so that they had whatever they needed to respond. And then each officer was issued a tourniquet with a donation from the Columbus Police Foundation, and then we continue to give new recruits tourniquets so that they have those. We've had so many saves in the community with those tourniquets where an officer responds and then they're able to save a life and save a limb by applying one of these tourniquets. So it's another example of when we are safe, the community is safe. And then I just wanted to make a plug for the Stop the Bleed campaign. Has anyone heard of that here in the community? So tourniquets are so easy to use. There is training that people can go to figure out how to use them, how to get a tourniquet. It's not unusual to go to a big venue like the Ohio Stadium or the Ohio State Fair and see life-saving items like this because we need to be prepared as a community. We also have automated external defibrillators, or AEDs, in every police location. We have about 40 total. Most of these are in facilities that are secured, but then the academy, which is public, and then headquarters also has them, so we never know whether we might use it on an employee or even a citizen who is there. The AEDs that we have are very helpful because they give the beats per minute, so you know how fast to go, and then they also give you feedback on if you're doing your chest compressions effectively. We're doing a pilot project in patrol right now where we have 36 AEDs out on the street. So the officer might be responding to a cardiac arrest, they might beat fire there, and they're able to use that AED on someone in the community. This has been a really good partnership with Fire, who has provided the training and also the joint protocol. So the AEDs go hand in hand with naloxone or Narcan. Lieutenant Dennis Jeffrey is our mental health lieutenant, and he's running that program. And we have about 800 people in the division who are trained and carrying naloxone, and this is to reverse an opioid overdose. And then there are more people being trained. We have about 600 in patrol, and we're trying to get everyone in patrol trained over the next year. To date, we have had 475 deployments of naloxone in the community, and 93% of these have been successful, so that person was able to survive. It's been another really good partnership with Columbus Fire. And even though this program is mainly for the public to be able to respond to runs where people have overdosed, we can also help fellow officers who've had an accidental exposure, and that has happened. And then another plug, have you heard of Project Dawn? That stands for Deaths Avoided with Naloxone. So there's training for anyone in the community to learn how to administer naloxone, to be equipped with a dose of it, to have just in case a loved one or maybe just someone like a stranger might need it. So that's a really good program for the community. And then the naloxone program goes hand in hand with drug evidence kits. Over the summer, I put together thousands and thousands of these kits and gave them to every cruiser in patrol and narcotics. So we all know there's an opioid epidemic in the city, all over the country. We have had so many positives for fentanyl in powdered drugs that we are treating any powdered drug with universal precautions, like it may or may not have fentanyl or other opioids. So the kit has everything the officer needs to be able to collect a powdered drug safely. It has bags, gloves, non-vented goggles, an air purifying respirator, and then a training aid to make it easy to know how to put everything on, how to collect that drug safely, and then how to get rid of it. And then there's an exchange program, so when the officer goes to the property room and turns in the evidence, they get a brand new kit, and they're ready to go for their next one. And that's been very helpful. And then finally, health screenings. We are really blessed as city employees to have access to Healthy Columbus. They provide a lot of services, and one of them is free health screenings. So they do screenings for city employees. They include body fat, body mass index, blood pressure, glucose, and cholesterol. And then they give you your results and then education about what numbers can maybe be improved and how to do that. So it's a really good way to monitor numbers. Even if someone is going to their own doctor and maybe working on something, they can do this free health screening and see where their numbers are and if they've improved or not. So every year we do screenings at places like the academy, headquarters, but I got more involved last year and I said, let's tweak the days and the times. Let's talk to officers and find out, hey, when is good for you, where you could actually take advantage of this and then make our numbers bigger. We also added a health screening at 3 and 17 sub, which is on the northwest part of town. So that substation has 2 precincts and a midwatch unit reporting, so they're basically officers going in and out of there all day long. The problem with that sub is that there's no room inside. So we thought outside the box and we brought in our mobile sub. So you can see in the picture there, we parked it in the parking lot. It was a nice hot day in August, but we were able to get about 100 people, maybe not 100, maybe 50 people screened that otherwise wouldn't have had time to go. It was right there. We brought it to them, so that was good for them. Last year, with these changes made to health screenings, we were able to screen 225 employees, and it's a big increase over the year before. And then we're going to continue to expand into this year and maybe bring it to more locations and try to get even more. In the fall, when flu shots were available, these were also offered as part of the screenings or offered by themselves, and last year we had 360 get vaccinated for the flu. So my contact information is there on that slide if anyone has questions or wants to contact me later. And if there are any questions now, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
So I have a question, and I remember Dr. Jones presented her presentation on 21st century policing. One of the things that stood out to me was a slide on police deaths and the causes of deaths, and traffic deaths were like the #1, far and above everything else. And when I did my ride along, I noticed that the officer I was with did not wear his seatbelt, and we had a conversation. I know there's disagreement, and I know there's concern about being able to get out of the vehicle quickly enough. So I'm curious, it seems like that's a pretty widespread kind of a practice that you don't necessarily wear your seatbelt unless maybe you're responding with lights and sirens. So I'm curious, what fraction of injuries are traffic injuries where the seatbelt's not being worn, and you know, what are the costs and benefits of, because I mean, in terms of a cultural change, that seems like that's an area where, you know, a cultural change could really have a big impact, because wearing your seatbelt versus standing desks and flu shots, it seems like the seatbelt is like the low-hanging fruit in terms of reducing potential injuries.
We have gotten better with seatbelts over the years. There is an expectation that seatbelts are worn in the cruiser. Now we know certainly there are situations like when you're coming up on the scene where you're not wearing it because you want to be able to get out of the car quickly. But with awareness and just trying to push it and have supervisors really enforce it, we've gotten better. So we have data on every single injury and crash that happens. In almost all of them, they are reporting that the seatbelt was worn. That's certainly something that we can continue to do better on and try to enforce, because you know, we certainly know that when a seatbelt is not worn, the crash can be a whole lot worse, and the injury to that officer can be a whole lot worse. And
just to quickly follow up, it seems like, I mean, that's something that we can measure, right? The car's gonna have a sensor that tell you, right, whether the seatbelt was worn or not, if that's a possible direction. Again, I know there's trade-offs in terms of, you know, in terms of whether wearing a seatbelt affects response time and things like that. But.
Yeah, there is technology for that. It's not anything that we have equipped right now, but it's something that we know is out there.
Just real quick, we have a fleet safety committee that looks at every single vehicle crash, and when information becomes aware to the fleet safety committee that seatbelt was not worn, then we discipline for that violation, and we've given officers notice or intent to do that. We also have signs at the exits of every substation and police facility about wearing your seatbelt. Remember to have your seatbelt on, different messages on there. We're requiring supervisors to engage officers on that issue. We were trying to handle it as a positive message, PSA type thing at the beginning. Now we're moving into a discipline phase if officers are not wearing those, because we agree. Chief Becker and I teach every recruit class about emergency vehicle operations, and we hammer home always the issue of not wearing a seatbelt and not being trapped in a car with your seatbelt on or whatever in emergency is far less likely than being in an accident and needing that seatbelt. Matter of fact, the seatbelt, even if you're not in a crash, if you're driving around at high speeds, you have more forces put on your body, you're more likely to stay in an upright position and control your car. So yeah, seatbelts are very important to us. We push them. We do allow them to take them off as they're pulling up to a scene so they can exit real quick. But those are things that are very important. I just looked up the National Law Enforcement Memorial page, and unfortunately I can't pull up right here the 2018 and the 19, since we're just in January, doesn't have a lot. But it was always traffic deaths that were always the highest number for officer deaths. That's actually being surpassed now, and we're actually having more deaths by firearms than traffic accidents. So it's harder to control how many officers are killed by firearms, but we can lower the numbers by officers killed by traffic crashes, which relate to not wearing seatbelts sometimes. So that's a campaign we do.
I have a real quick question regarding the naloxone. Am I saying that right? I know there's two versions. I know officers, you said all officers carry it in their safety kit in their car. Is that what I heard you say?
We have 800 personnel
officers.
who are trained and who are carrying it, and then we have 600 in patrol, and we're increasing that number over this year to try to get about all 1,000 patrol officers carrying it.
So in regard to that question, I recently attended the National Harm Reduction Conference in New Orleans, which was interesting. My question is, how much research have we done, or has the police department done? I know to address the opioid crisis, we jumped to this as one of the solutions. How much research have we done on the effects of these drugs on people that are continuously being, the only way I can describe it is being brought back from a drug overdose or brought back to life, which there was a lot of deep sessions that I sat in around that. And most of them came we got to this place so quickly, we don't have enough data now to know the long term. But I was curious to know, have you dug, or has the police department as a whole dug into that to really begin to think about a lot of these new drugs or reaction drugs or approaches to addressing a huge problem. But I just don't feel like we have enough research, and it concerns a lot of people on the ground. I know the faith community has been having some sessions around it and trying to figure out how they address it. But do we know enough about these drugs and the long-term effects? Has that been studied internally, or is it just us trying to get to some solution to saving lives and we don't really know?
Well, I do know the drug is approved by the FDA, and so there have to be rigorous tests and proof that that drug is safe for people to use. It's even safe for our canines to receive in case they get an exposure. We are under the operation of Columbus Fire, so since it is a drug and it's a pharmaceutical, we need a medical director. So the medical director of Fire is the one who is kind of the authority over us to administer that drug. You can actually, from the studies that we know of and that we are operating on, are that naloxone can be administered twice, 3 times, 5 times, however many times, because sometimes a person who has really had a big overdose, they'll need multiple doses of naloxone to even get them to come to. And all of those doses are safe, especially versus the alternative of them succumbing to that overdose. Even if a person has not overdosed from an opioid and it's been something else, it is still safe to take naloxone. So it's a drug that has been researched with all those factors in mind because sometimes we don't know that it actually is an opioid and it is safe to use.
The Board of Health, in conjunction with the fire department, does have a program where they will go to the person's house and try to engage in different social services, et cetera. But I do not think there's a study on the long term. That would be a federal type study, but I don't think that's going on in place.
It was shocking to me at this national conference that they were saying that we just don't have enough time and data compiled enough to know. And so it concerned me because I know here in Ohio, we lead the nation, that a lot of our solutions are around making sure that it's available. Right. Many churches are giving it out. And so it's beginning to be something that people are looking at because we don't have enough data around it. So I was just curious if public safety is thinking about it from that aspect too. We just don't know enough about it.
Can I just jump in really quick, like Tammy? So there is some research coming out right now that's very controversial that looks at the dates at which different cities implement this, kind of the phased rollout, and one of the findings is that after cities start using naloxone, the number of people admitted to emergency rooms for drug-related issues goes up, and it's very controversial what that means. So the economists that did this research said it means it encourages people to use drugs because they are less worried about potentially dying. The other interpretation is that after they're revived, the police take them to the emergency room, so there's just more more interactions. But there is a little bit of research, and it's very controversial, and how to interpret it is kind of
And in
interesting.
other countries, they're creating these safe spaces. So part of, I was just blown away at this conference because there were people from Canada, all over the world. But they're in other countries, they're creating these safe spaces where literally people are using, and counselors and public health people are there with the naloxone and Narcan and all of that to bring these people back to life. And so that, I don't want to get down that rabbit hole, but I would just hope we're thinking about, I know that we have to address this crisis as an epidemic, but some of the solutions we just don't know enough about. So I just wanted to see how you guys are thinking about that.
So I wanted to go back to the vest cover system. You said Bexley and somewhere else was also using it. Seattle?
Toledo.
Is it rated to be as safe for officers as the other protective kind of clothing that they've traditionally worn?
It's the same type of armor, it's just worn in a different place.
Okay.
And since there's not an issue with adjustment, you're more secure with where you have it because it's not shifting underneath everything.
So it's equally safe, so then is it more expensive? What's the barrier for us transitioning to that as opposed to what we currently wear?
It's just such a new thing that we need to talk about so many different factors, like color of what is our uniform going to look like. There's bargaining unit kind of implications. Chief Quinlan is over the uniform committee, so he can speak more to that.
The uniform, we wear white shirts. Most officers that have the outer vest carriers wear dark shirts, and you can wear the dark vest carrier with a fresh shirt underneath it, but the dark vest carrier day in and day out, because it doesn't show any type of dirt. The white shirt you'd have to almost wash every day, which means you're taking the panels in and out of a shirt, of a carrier every day, which can damage the panels, and you just can't wear it more than one day with it as a white carrier. And we're really not inclined to get away from the white shirts. We're one of the few agencies in the country that wear white shirts all the way down to the officer level. And we're kind of known for that. We're proud of that.
Proud of it, yeah.
And I don't know that we're prepared to change that. Plus, the outer vest carrier sometimes also gives more of a militaristic look, and people are not as in favor of that. So there's a variety of reasons. We have tested it, but that's one of the sticking points right now.
Okay. And then the other question I had was regarding the physical fitness standard. For those who were hired prior to 08, what's the physical fitness standard for those officers as opposed to those who were hired post-08 that do have a standard?
So the people who were hired before it's voluntary to do that physical fitness test, everyone who does the test, they have the same requirements for what levels they achieve based on their gender and their age. So it's voluntary for them, but it's still the same standard for the test.
So it's voluntary for those who were sworn prior to 08?
Correct.
Mandatory for those who were hired post-08?
Yes.
Fair, okay.
Would it be your office that would look into safety and feasibility of implementing the hijab for the uniform?
I think I would have a part in that since my role is under human resources, but I don't think that that would be solely under my section.
Have you done any, just out of curiosity, any research into safety of implementing the hijab?
I actually have not.
Okay.
But that is something to consider.
Are there other forces throughout the country that?
Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Yeah, it's
Whatever we allow. Because one group asked for an accommodation or a change to our policy that we may not be opposed to, we have to also recognize anyone else that has something, because we can't, being government, we can't pick religious preferences or anything. So if somebody, wants to wear whatever you want to, a sword or whatever the religious symbol is that they want to wear, we'd have to accommodate everyone. And some religions aren't necessarily as widely accepted. They're whatever they want to create and they call it a religion. So we can't control what they may want to carry or wear. And we have to be open to all. So if we do something for one, it's kind of open to all, and we really don't want to open that issue at this time. That's the one concern about that.
So, just a couple quick questions. You mentioned drug testing. Is there testing following critical incidences? I know there's random testing, but like, say you shoot someone, or you are in a car accident, or...
There's also reasonable suspicion testing, and I didn't cover that. So if there is any reason to suspect anything, then that's when that testing would come into play.
And so how is the determination made of reasonable suspicion?
Just real quick, in a critical incident, because there is reasonable suspicion testing, supervisor could see something and for any reason. But in a critical incident, the investigating supervisor can order a person, and our policy requires that they undergo testing that the investigating supervisor requires. So they are mandated to do that. It's an order. If they refuse the order, it's insubordination.
But the supervisor makes the determination as to whether that test takes place or
The
not.
investigating supervisor.
Okay. At the training academy, are these exercise physiologists, PTs, and athletic trainers there during recruit training, or do you guys outsource that? Like, just in case somebody gets hurt, or are they there during the process?
Well, I mentioned those roles for that functional movement analysis, so
Right.
we outsource that. That would be Mount Carmel Occupational Health. They're the same group that administers our physical fitness test, and then they are certified exercise physiologists, so they also do that functional movement analysis. At the academy, we do have a citywide occupational safety and health clinic. It's contracted by the city, so we have doctors and nurses, and they'll come out for boxing and for hitman and for various activities just to monitor for injuries and kind of help out if anything happens there.
Excellent, thank you. And then finally, is there any comparison across like zones or precincts or shifts of health data? Like that certain shifts or certain locations appear to have better health results in their testing than others? Or worse?
I haven't looked at that lately. Those data certainly are available. We typically have people on first shift who are have more time on, so they might be older in years. And then we have our younger, newer recruits on second and third. So there could be some trends there. I just haven't looked at that lately.
I would just be interested in seeing that if there are some patterns there. No, yes, sir, please.
One other question. Will there be any conversation around the use of medical marijuana as opposed to opioid use for pain management for officers?
That I am not sure of.
As long as it's a federal law, we will not be making any changes at all of that because it's still a federal violation.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
Medical marijuana is legal in Ohio, so does federal law supersede anything that happens, or I thought it was home rule and state jurisdiction?
We're not going to violate federal law. It's concurrent.
Concurrent to both state and federal? So where does the state law apply in that? It just doesn't?
Would not be a violation under state, would be a violation under federal.
And the federal law would supersede whatever the state.
Concurrent, I don't know if supersede, but both are
You
applicable.
can't violate either.
Yeah,
violate
you
it either.
exactly. They're concurrent.
All right, I think I saw a hand over here, and we're going to let that one be the last for this because we want to keep things moving along, and we still have your presentation to do, so.
Yeah, I just have a quick follow-up on this question. I think Minneapolis has like the tearaway job. And it's anecdotally, I haven't heard people showing up also with like swords or devil horns. So I'm just curious, is this like a hypothetical concern, or I mean, is it based on?
No, it would be I don't know if it's so much of an issue of safety. It's an issue of if you make an accommodation to
No,
one.
I understand. Yeah.
So there's a First Amendment.
No, I understand, but I'm just curious. I mean, it doesn't seem like in Minneapolis people have tried to use this exemption to try to ask for other accommodations. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So next up, we have Deputy Chief Tim Becker and Ms. Buster from CARE. Who's going first? Okay. you don't need it before then, I can bring it to you.
No, I'm good.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just keep it with me because I'm always.
Sure.
Is anyone on the commission an attorney?
An attorney? No, that's why we have all these legal questions. The attorneys are sitting out there. Plan was to end this early. Plan was to get out. I tricked myself. What about that? Wait, no, I'm weak as Sean. Sean has all these questions, then he gonna leave early. It's your fault.
Okay, how'd they fix that last time?
I don't know.
I don't remember what they did.
Grabbing your signal.
No, just,
No, we already did that. Yeah. That's what he gives us. So, yeah, find out if they can get there.
That should have done it.
all displays.
Show on. Just to complete these displays. That didn't do it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Keep these.
Yeah, I'll just
Go back out of that.
yeah.
Technology is just not working with us today. Oh, there it is.
Oh, it's
Catch up.
All right, we all set?
Jason Jackson trying to call me.
Okay,
Oh, you need
It's on you.
advance the slides.
I can advance them. I'll just reach over. Go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Tim Becker again. I want to talk to you a little bit about our community outreach and traumatic incidents. And really, I have a PowerPoint. I can go through it, but I don't really need it. In short, I can say we're not trauma counselors. We get a lot of training, as you've heard throughout these presentations. And we try to do better at becoming trauma counselors, but we're not trained counselors. So we've looked at ways that we can improve what we do. And I'm the investigative deputy chief, which means I oversee most of our detectives. I've only been in that role about 13, 14 months, relatively short. And it didn't take me a real long time to quickly figure out that I don't think we communicate to the public of incidents that we're involved in very well. And I've had people like Director Speaks reaffirm that with me, and as well as Prosecutor O'Brien, a lot of people in the community. So I've been looking for a way that we can do things better. And one of the things, and do you mind if I just skip going through the slides? Okay, it might speed things up. One of the things that I had an opportunity to participate in is the Mayor's Violent Crime Review Group. About midway through last year, I got added to the committee, and I got an opportunity to be down there. And starting in summer, whenever there's a homicide in the Linden area, we immediately, generally within 24 hours, we have a conference call. And there's a lot of people in this room or on this call. And the people include the mayor's office, they include public health. Dr. Roberts is, Mashika Roberts is the commissioner who runs the committee. Police is there, public safety is there. Parks and Recs is there. Pretty much all the city departments. As we heard earlier from Commander Grizel, one of the major issues we often hear is trash is a problem. There have been some research by one of the city attorneys that showed a really strong correlation between violent crime in the city of Columbus and complaints about trash pickup. And so we know some of the blighted neighborhoods have similar problems. So we decided, or not we, I just got added to the group, but a decision was made to incorporate a lot of different city entities into this process. So whenever we had a homicide in Linden, we convened the group via telephone call, either Chief Bash or I. We'll go through the details that we can give out about the homicide and talk about to the group. And then the group has 48 hours to follow up. And they go out, the CARE Coalition goes out with counselors to the neighborhood because they know there's trauma in that neighborhood every time somebody loses a life. And they start going out and looking to see if there's abandoned houses, if they're already in the land bank, can they get destroyed quicker? If they were already on the list, can they get bumped to the top? Were there 311 complaints for trash? Were there housing and housing complaints in the area that need addressed? All this stuff was going on for homicides, and that was Linden. In the fall, it expanded to the Hilltop into the near southeast side. It's portions of 11 and 13 precinct. And so that group is doing 3 neighborhoods. And since I started attending their meetings and talking with the group, I saw a lot of things I liked. Generally deal with Marion Stuckey of the CARE Coalition. And I went back and thought, how could we apply this to other processes that we don't do that good of a job at? And one of them has always been police-involved shootings or deaths in custody. I don't think we always communicate that well. And so looking at how we could do stuff, I directed my people that we were going to make a change, and that effective January 1st of this year, whenever there was a police-involved situation that involved a loss of life or involved a serious injury to a juvenile, that within 3 to 5 business days, that one of the commanders, or the commander, me, and one of my 2 lieutenants, that 2 of us were going to reach out to the family of the person involved and just try to give them some information about what the process looks like. We can't talk about specific details. We're not going to debate right or wrong. We don't know that. These investigations take a long time to do a thorough investigation. It's way too preliminary for that. But we can explain what the steps of the process are. Our former PIO, I come to learn, Rich Weiner, had experienced the same issues in his tenure as PIO, and had our people in our research and development working on developing a pamphlet that we can hand out that explains that process, gives a place to leave numbers. And so we're still working on that. And then I wanted to what could I bring to the community if I do that that's helpful? And so I met with Marion and asked if, it's 15 incidents roughly a year that fit these criteria. Could we bring the services of the CARE Coalition to these people? And they're hurting, whether their loved one was right or wrong, they're still hurting, they lost a loved one. Can we help them with that trauma by bringing some services to them? The CARE Coalition gladly jumped on board. We were meeting, trying to plan out strategically how we were going to do it, and Lisa Callender, who you just heard from, she was involved in that as well, as giving us some direction. Again, we're police officers, we're not necessarily trauma counselors, on how we could do this effectively. So the plan was to put it in place January 1st. I was away in training in Kansas City in early December, and I landed in Port Columbus, and literally as we're taxiing to the runway, I turned on my phone, or taxiing up to the terminal, and my phone immediately, as soon as I turn it on, starts ringing, and it's my lieutenant notifying me of the police-involved situation out on Mount Vernon Avenue with Julius Tate, who was trying to rob one of our SWAT guys during a delivery of a weapon. There had also been another SWAT situation just 3 days before that, where the gentleman the suspect that was shot, did not expire, and he was an adult, so that generally wouldn't meet our criteria. But we made a collective decision to let's give this a try now. Why wait till the first of the year? If something positive comes from this, let's do this now. In one case, we knew that the estate was already represented by an attorney, because the attorney had been on the news a lot immediately afterwards. So we reached out to that attorney, and we offered to meet with the attorney and the clients and just share the information that we could, explain the process. That offer was declined. We also reached out to the family of the other gentleman he was still hospitalized, he hadn't been transferred to jail yet, and offered to explain the process to them. That offer was also declined. So we really didn't get an opportunity to do it. We attempted it, but we didn't get an opportunity to do it. However, right as this is going on, when Julius Tate, when right after, like 2 days after, as part of it, information developed and his girlfriend was charged with murder out of that, which is a charge that we've used regularly. The prosecutor's office had been working with our detectives. Evidence had been developed to lead to that charge. Her mother came to police headquarters looking for records and was down at our information desk, kind of demanding answers. Commander Gray and I saw that as a good opportunity. We didn't have an opportunity to get somebody from the CARE Coalition down to our headquarters immediately while she was there because we weren't expecting her. But we saw it as a good opportunity to try to reach out to her. We went down. We have an area that used to be a cafeteria. There's nothing there now, but a few tables and chairs. We sat down with her for about 45 minutes, had a discussion. At the end of the discussion, she was not, I won't say she was happy with us. I do believe she left there with answers to a lot of questions that she had, not maybe the answers she wanted to hear, or not answer to every question, because we can't talk about the details. Often, in this particular case, the officers that were involved in the shooting had not even been interviewed yet. So I don't even know some of the details of what she was asking, because we don't know that. But the thought process behind it was, the waiting, the 3 to 5 days, is take my investigators out of it. We've talked to the investigator. There's always somebody that notifies the next of kin immediately. The night of the incident, that's going to continue. But that investigator is involved in the charges and stuff. It often gets heated. Myself, my commander, or my other lieutenants, they aren't involved in any of that. So we're a little bit distanced from the actual investigation, but we completely understand the process that's going on. So that's how we got to what we're attempting to do in 2019. And I'll let Emily talk about the CARE Coalition and what services that they can provide. But that in a nutshell is what we're attempting. If you have input or direction or thoughts on how we could do this more effectively, I'm thrilled to hear that. But maybe after Emily's done, if there's any unanswered questions, then the both of us will be happy to answer whatever you have.
Strange to be on this side. So I'll just say a couple things as he's getting mine up and running. So I am not CARE staff. I represent my agency on the CARE steering committee. As Deputy Chief Becker mentioned, Marion Stuckey at Columbus Public Health is our leader. I know she wanted to be here tonight. She teaches a class at OSU on Wednesday, so she couldn't be here, and since I'm here anyway, she asked if I would speak on behalf of CARE, and I was happy to. So I joined the CARE Coalition back in 2016. It started back in 2015 with basically the way it started was a concerned community member called Columbus Public Health and said, our community is hurting. We just experienced a triple homicide in our neighborhood. You can go to the next slide. We just experienced a triple homicide. A 7-year-old, 2 parents were killed. We need you. We are in crisis. We are hurting. And so members from Columbus Public Health, NetCare, CPD went and canvassed the neighborhood, knocked on doors, checked on people. How are you doing? Tried to, connect people to resources. And those involved in the picture here basically left saying, we need to do this. This needs to be a regular part of our work. So that's how the coalition started. You can go to the next one. So we started having meetings at Columbus Public Health. They were initially pretty small, 15, 20 organizations represented. Over time, we've developed a mission and a vision. The vision is that Columbus becomes trauma-informed. And really what that means is if you've been to any trauma-informed care training, if it's a good one, what they're gonna ask you to do is make a mind shift, which is, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. It's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. And if you make that mind shift, it completely changes your life. It changes how you interact with people. You know, all behavior is part of our lived experiences. All behavior is communication. So if every person in this community who has direct service with community members is taking that trauma-informed approach, I believe passionately and strongly we change the way we interact with each other. So that's what being trauma-informed means, and that's the ultimate goal of the CARE Coalition. Next one. So it's a partnership of 100 agencies, my agency, tons of other social service providers come. We meet every month. It's part of Mayor Ginther's comprehensive neighborhood safety strategy, which I think is one of it's been taught, the word CARE Coalition has been used many times, and so I think that's why it's good to just sort of get a general overview of what we do. You can go to the next slide. So we have several work groups. Each work group obviously has their own outcomes, goals. I co-chair the training work group. There's also community trauma resource team, the outreach group, networking, and then what's not mentioned up there is an outcomes group. So each subcommittee also meets to work towards their specific goal of their subcommittee. So for example, on training, we're trying to go out there and provide trauma-informed care training to any organization that's interested in it for no charge. Yeah. So a lot of times when we think about trauma, we think about it as something that's individual. You know, you have experienced a traumatic event like a fire in your home or a tornado, but really what we know is that not only do we have individual trauma, but we have communities in trauma, communities that are hurting. And so a lot of what CARE wants to do is broaden that definition of trauma, but also address the community trauma. So when you have communities that are in trauma, they're isolated, they're numb, depressed, say things like this always happens here. So part of the CARE response is to move out of that social isolation, out of that this always happens to us, to going door to door when we're called out. Connecting people to social service agencies, building the awareness about being trauma-informed, and creating a network among social service providers so that we can better serve our clients. Because all social service providers have their own expertise, and if we're all working together, we can better serve our community. So this is just another infographic for those of you that are visual like me that helps explain communities and trauma. Many of you may have heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research connecting adversity in childhood to health outcomes. And basically what they found is that the more adversity that you experience in childhood, the greater you are for negative health outcomes, like greater risk for heart disease, cancer, suicidality, alcoholism. And if you have 6 or more adverse childhood experiences, then that can take 20 years off of your life expectancy. So again, this infographic is showing us, maybe you don't have violence in your home, but if in your community you're hearing the sirens all the time, if there's a lot of violence, that is traumatic. If you have poor housing quality, that is traumatic. I would add, as somebody who works with the immigrant refugee community, migration to the bottom of the adverse childhood experiences, community experiences, racism. These are all traumatic experiences. So it's about broadening that definition and understanding the impact that it can have on our health and our behaviors. So this is the Community Trauma Resource Team. I am not actively involved in this, but we had several people that went through the NOVA training model, which is the National Organizations for Victims Assistance, on community debriefing. I think they sort of, use that when it's appropriate. Sometimes when you're out in communities, using that very regimented, strict model is not always appropriate. But it's all about, it's the door-to-door, partnering with apps. That we had I know an elementary school principal who called out CARE to come canvass the neighborhood of her elementary school after there had been several homicides in that area. So lots of ways that the community trauma resource team can be activated. So anybody can make a referral to bring out the community trauma resource team, and the person to contact for that would be Marion to activate a community debriefing. This is my work group, the training work group. So back at the end of 2017, there were 26 of us who went through extensive training on how to be trauma responsive. So it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you, and then taking it to that next level of how do we respond to people who need relationship building, hope, healing, and then being able to teach that to other people so that they can respond in that way. It's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you, and what did you do to survive? And then honoring that as someone's greatest act of courage. So sometimes what somebody does to survive is they steal, or they manipulate, or they hoard. But we know that those are survival skills. That's what they've done to get to where they are today. And if we can remove the shame and respond to them in a way that builds relationship and trust, then we can put that person on a path towards healing. And so really what the training work group is trying to do, that's us, bonus points if you can find me in there. It was a great, life-changing experience that we all went through together. And we're now all out in the community, in our own organizations, providing training and information on how to respond to people in trauma. A lot of what CARE has done through their pilot year has been conduct listening sessions and really just going out and hearing from the community about what they're experiencing. So this was a quote from a listening session in the Hilltop. I was traumatized when I came outside and found a dead woman in my front yard from an overdose. I was thinking about when the commander who was up here earlier was talking about, the vicarious trauma that officers experience when they see these things. And I think Commissioner Waugh also pointed to that of this vicarious trauma that the community members are also experiencing. Maybe it wasn't their loved one, but it's somebody in their neighborhood, in their community. They're seeing this violence. So we have to understand that community trauma if we're going to help people heal. This was another situation where there was a mother who was grieving. She got connected to a CARE social worker. She was connected to parents of murdered children for support. The CARE social worker attended the vigil with her. So this is just an example of some of the support that CARE is trying to provide to community members. Another quote from the field that a community trauma resource team reported, that one of the neighbors said, "Thank you for checking in on us. So much happens here and we usually feel like no one cares." So just being the people that are going out there, knocking on the doors, connecting, saying, hey, I can connect you to resources, or just giving somebody the opportunity to speak and share can also be incredibly healing, just to have somebody there to say, I hear you. I'm sorry you're having to walk this road. Some of the successes of the pilot year, I think they've knocked on over 3,000 homes. We've trained over 600 people. We held a remembrance vigil for 75 members, family members who had been lost by homicide. Lots of mental health wellness events. Not just the reactive, but the proactive, going into communities, trying to teach coping skills. We've gone into a couple of middle schools, Wedgwood Middle School, Hiltonia Middle School, just to name a couple, to talk to kids about, how do you experience stress? What are your coping skills? And really just trying to talk to them and hear them. I think that's it. That's CARE. Thanks.
Thank you. So we have a little bit of time for questions. And I know while you both were giving your presentations, one question did come to mind for me. So Chief Becker, when you all go out after like an officer-involved shooting, is it you go first and then contact CARE, or are they simultaneously?
CARE is going with us.
Oh, okay.
It's
CARE is
joint.
going, okay. That's what I wasn't clear on. Thank you. Any other questions? I think everybody's ready to go. Whoa.
Real quick, so this went into effect to Officer, or Chief Becker, this went into effect January 1st of this year or last year?
This year.
Of this year.
It actually ended up going in effect like December 5th of last year. The plan was January 1st. We had the 2 police-involved incidents back to back, and so we decided to enact it about a month early.
So when you say enact it, can you give us a little, is there somewhere where we can know what it is? Is it, so I wrote down, you said within 3 to 5 business days, you reach out to the family. I heard you say that. Explaining the steps in the process. Is there some kind of brief somewhere we can find out what is the objective of? And is this under public health and you sit on the commission, or is this something just under the police?
This is under police.
So can you give us a little bit more about what it is that you do within these 3 to 5 business days?
The objective for police is to provide the information about how the police-involved shooting process works. What we do internally, what the prosecutor's office does, how it ends up at a grand jury, all those steps leading up to that, and spell that out for them. Make sure they understand that process and do whatever we can to answer questions about the process. We can't answer questions about the specific case, as I mentioned, because we probably aren't going to know most of them at 3 to 5 days. We will cross the bridge when we get there if we have video of the incident, whether we show the video at that time or not. That's something that's still being debated. We don't know. I guess it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. And what the city attorneys say and the prosecutors say, they all have a weigh-in because that video is evidentiary at that point. So it's not a public record, but if there's an opportunity to help provide understanding without jeopardizing the criminal case, our goal is to provide that understanding of what actually transpired. And this has been experimented with just over the last couple of years. It's been experimented with a couple times without a plan. It just, because something happened and there was a little community concern or there was uprising, or on one instance, our first body-worn camera incident where this person had a gun, was reaching for the gun, and the officer shot him, and the media reports came out that they didn't have a gun. And it was on video clearly that the person had the gun and was reaching for the gun. So a decision by others, I wasn't involved in that, was made to go out, and they met with them, and the prosecutor had approved showing that video. But the 3 to 5 days is not set in stone. It's somewhat organic in that I've been present with multiple people that have been diagnosed with cancer. And at the moment of that diagnosis, that trauma, that diagnosis, their brain shut down. I can tell you that because it's happened to me and a couple times. And I know you kind of shut down. Even if you want to hear, you don't hear, because all you're thinking is, what's this going to mean to me in the future? So a few days later, after the emotions removed from the incident, an opportunity to sit down and explain the process, offer the care services, because right away, I think if we went out the day it happened, most people are going to say, no thanks to CARE, no thank, you guys are the ones that killed us and they're with you, we don't want you around, and that's not our goal. And so that was that all this is flexible, nothing is, you say what's the process, is it written down somewhere? It is not. Because we're still in development, really. I imagine most of this year it's going to be pretty organic, and that's what I said. I welcome any input. If you think there's a way we can do it better, we'll consider anything, because we're just doing a best educated guess based on experience and what the situations have led to in the past.
I think this is towards transparency, but I think the one little thing I would say maybe we can visit or, think about a little more is the 5 days. And so, like, if there's no contact for 5 days, like, how would that come off?
A detective is always going to have contact immediately.
Okay.
So there's going to be contact immediately. The 5 days was, if it happens Friday at 8 o'clock at night on this last weekend and it's a holiday weekend, people may not be available. And then if it happened Friday night, that the people aren't necessarily back at work to get the Care Coalition until Tuesday to even coordinate to see their availability, because we have to do some coordination before we call and offer the services to make sure they're actually available. We don't want to call and offer something we can't deliver at that point. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is more a comment more so than the question. And while I do feel just what you're sharing is there's well intention behind it, I do think that this is where, and it's not an easy fix, it's not an overnight fix, where real community relation building needs to take place and has to take place, because right now, in particular in a lot of communities where these kind of incident, officer involvement, shootings, incidents take place, there is not much trust in police. And because of that, and because they don't trust you, they don't trust, while you want to share with them the process, they already don't trust the process. And the reason is because the lack of trust that has been built over time in police, not you, the individual, but just in police in general. So that's where, while I do believe it's well-intentioned, that's where there has to be a lot of healing and community building and relationship to take place, so that this program that you're trying to implement can really have the intended impact that you would like and we would all would like to see in our community.
Before, grew up in a neighborhood you pastored to. I didn't trust the police. So I understand that's going to take a long time to build that. If I can only control what I can control, if I can reach one person one at a time, then that's better than what we were doing last year if it was 0. And if it's 2 people the next year, but all these, when somebody loses their life, I'm very passionate about improving our homicide solve rate. 1, because I don't want murderers to get away with murder. But 2, because everybody that dies, there's 5, 6 family members, good friends, their lives are changed forever. I have some of my friends growing up that are homicide victims. Those families don't ever get over that. And if we can solve and at least add some closure, that's part of the reason I'm passionate about that, because I'd like to give them that closure. And I'd like to take people who are willing to kill others off the street before they, take another family. But, if we have, over the course of time, 100 homicides a year in Columbus and 50 of those are unsolved for 10 years, that's a lot. And you multiply that by 4 or 6 people that are really traumatically impacted, that's a lot of people hurting in our community over time. And so I'd like to do at least what we can to add that closure to that case. So we're not going to make great strides overnight. I have no false expectations. If we can make baby steps and have small successes, learn from it, modify what we're doing, and get better, that's our goal.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just have one quick question.
Oh, got to.
About any upcoming care events or anything, because I thought I heard in the wind that there may be another community vigil coming up.
The vigil is April, it's in my phone, April 10th, I think. There is another vigil. It's at COSI again. The information for that will definitely be pushed out. But yes, the planning is already in place. The date has been set. There is another vigil. We're hosting an event at Columbus Public Health also in February. The date's in my phone. I don't have it in my head, on cultural humility and grief. So how to work with people from other cultures when they're grieving. and I'm sure there'll be, I mean, you can activate CARE at any time, you can request a training at any time. Those are the 2 dates that I know that are definitely on the calendar. Can I get my phone?
Okay, are we, thank you, but I heard you say that you're open for suggestions and input. And thank you for seeing a need and trying to figure out something. I definitely want to acknowledge that. With the Julius Tate situation, there's a bunch of young people, and for you as well, Emily, I don't know if you're aware, that have marched up and down Broad Street. I don't know if they had anything to do with the graffiti over there at the Justice Park or not, but there's a bunch of people that I think that as people wanting to reach out and figure out how to bridge some of these divides, I think I would suggest getting away from the traditional places of reaching and ideas about how we reach these folks. I think it was on your slide, Emily, where CARE says it reaches out to the immediate family, and but also in the presentation you said that a community is affected. And so I think that we have to broaden how we reach. I today just came from a meeting at AUS. Many of Julius Tate's friends are over at that school, and they're figuring out how to protest. They called us in and asked us to help them speak out or voice their concerns. That stuff is out there. I know you guys see it, and I think that we have to figure out how do we go into those spaces and not these traditional spaces or expect them to come down to the headquarters and sit in the lobby. They're not going to do that. They're going to be on the street.
To ask anybody for what we're doing to come to police headquarters, nobody's going to show up for that.
Right, yeah. So
all right, but finding a spot to reach, and I was talking to Chief Quinlan this morning, as I look around at how other cities that are more successful in solving homicides than us, some of the things they do is go back out to those communities with counselors, meet them where the homicide occurred a day or 2 later, talk about what they can about the case. Just, this is not police involved, not anything. Columbus just isn't at that point yet. I've talked to Marion. The staffing isn't there on 100 homicides to go back out on 3 different shifts during those hours. But we're looking at alternatives, and I agree completely. There's a lot of room for growth. And it's reaching people where they're at. It's not saying come to us.
In all of today's, and I'll close, I know we got to go, but I got 5-6 minutes. In all the presentations today, for some reason, was all around voluntary, selective, by choice, no resources, a small staff. And I think, again, getting 2 recommendations of what we must do is we have to put, so Miriam, 3 years ago in 2015, I sat down with then Director Teresa Long of Public Health, who said, with council, we sat in a meeting about getting to trauma-informed, and what she said to all of us, including council, is what gets funded, gets done. And until we put money, that's how a lot of this money got moved into, got to CARE Coalition. Until we put the money and the resources, knowing that I don't know what the number is now, I know numbers people may know, but for years, over 80% of the budget in the city goes to public safety. And so we got to look at these budgets and figure out how we direct real resources, Director and others on the record, to solving these real-time problems. We are leading the nation in violence and police-involved shootings and all of these things based on data, and people say data can be adjusted. I just got some report I definitely want to share with you, Director Speaks. It came from a national check. Not in violent crime, and let me be real clear, because I hate when I say something I'm not being real clear, and I don't want to put false information out there, and I definitely want to know if this is true, that Columbus leads the nation in the killing of its citizens at the hands of police, that we are in the top 5. I think last year there was a report that came out nationally, 2 years ago after Tyree King and Henry Green, that supported those numbers. We brought it to City Council, to the mayor, and all of those things. And that's why I'm real big on data, because there's messages framed that some may be true or some may not. I'm glad that the homicide numbers, I just got a chance to start looking through some of these reports, have gone down. That's why we're here, is we gotta really put real-time resources, real-time solutions. We can't just play around with this thing if we're gonna get to the outcomes we seek. And for me, sitting on the commission, it's to figure out how we reestablish trust, figure out how we exist together, in our communities, and get to, I think, why most of us is here. And these blanket things, and I love that we keep having these folks come in and tell us that we're doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but it really concerns me when I keep hearing that it's voluntary, it's selective, it's not something that's implemented across the board. I worked very closely. I was at the beginning of the CARE Coalition. The CARE Coalition has resources, but they don't have enough to reach. And then it is, in any intervention strategy, it is the credible messenger. So you have to have the right people reaching. People from that community changes its community. And so I think that the way we think about these things is some person or some thing or some program is going to swoop down and heal us all. But it's going to take buy-in from the community. It's going to take deeper conversations, and that has to be done with some type of resources to get to something that we can measure.
Emily and Chief, one of the recommendations from this committee was for more resources for community-informed trauma. You would be for it, I'm assuming.
I'm not saying more resources for CARE Coalition. I mean, I think CARE Coalition is trying to get to some out to trauma informed, but that will not solve the whole problem. So all the resources.
More resources in general.
I think we need to decide what it is, are these recommendations that we will make as this committee, and then we need to define how are we going to fund it, and not in a way that, in a silo. All the things that were presented today were things that were voluntary staff, a voluntary group of people that have to be like us. Like we have the ability to not come or to come. But I think when we get serious about it, we put real resources and real people in charge, then we really get to some real solutions. And so I just want to make sure that's on the record. In the last meeting I was in, most of it's been around people get the choice to select in or out. It's selective who we drug test. It's selective who we do this with. And if it becomes blanket policy, then I think that we can make some progress.
Thank you.
And real resources.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Becker and Commissioner Buster. I think we are all set. Is everybody in favor of ending the meeting? All right, so we will adjourn at 5:56. 4 minutes early. 4 minutes early. We'll have is on February the 20th. February the 20th, I believe at 12 o'clock. And that should be updated, and the information should be disseminated to everybody.